listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. It's September 23rd. It's just past 7 a.m. Eastern, and it's now time for our first batch of headlines this morning. Let's get into the COVID stats. There were about 146,000 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. Also, 2,784 deaths reported. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 131,000 cases per day. That's a decrease of 12% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 55% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 64% of residents have received at least one dose. Those numbers have been mostly stalled for a long time now, and they will probably remain that way for, the foreseeable future. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 42,550,000 people across the United States. It has killed 681,341 people. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is pushing for her country to get as close to a 90% vaccination rate as possible. This comes after the country's health minister said the country would likely not be able to reach zero cases. That was earlier this week. And it follows over a year of an almost entirely successful zero-tolerance policy for restricting the spread of SARS-CoV-2 with tight national lockdowns and the help of New Zealand's being an island. On this episode of What Stupid Thing Is Gen Z Doing Now, we have a popular social media trend beginning. Saul, I'm going to check with you on this one real quick. I'm giving you three options here. Is it A, putting a random bra in their dad's dirty laundry, B, puffing antiseptic to treat COVID-19, or C, trying to drink a shot through their nose with straws? This is a new, dangerous Gen Z trends. What's your take, Saul? I think it's the last one, trying to drink a shot through their nose. Sadly, you are incorrect. It's B. He guessed C, trying to drink a shot through their nose. It is actually B. A dangerous trend of putting hydrogen peroxide in nebulizers and then breathing it in is going viral on social media. Health experts and journals universally are warning against this practice. Yesterday, the FDA, the thing is, Jamarl, you came in after I gave the answer. I was hoping I could go to you next hour or something like that, because you stepped out for a second. I gave him a multi-choice option. So I got it. It was C.
Yeah.
Pardon me. It was B. It was B. It was the nebulizer one. Wow. Anyway, yeah, again, the latest in What Stupid Thing Is Gen Z Doing Now. And Austin, that was the way you phrased that. I remember you having fairly critical comments of Gen Zers, like Zoomers. You can be an honorary millennial, or you can go back as far as you want to. I guess somebody can make you an honorary boomer or an honorary greatest generationer, whatever you want to be, really. Yesterday, the FDA authorized Pfizer booster shots for people 65 and older and other at-risk groups. This comes not long after an FDA committee overwhelmingly agreed the boosters are, as of now, not necessary for the majority of people. Biden announced yesterday that America would be doubling its donations of vaccines to the global effort to reduce the severity of COVID-19. That was during his address on COVID-19, the global response to it, yesterday at the UN General Assembly. In national news, in a court filing yesterday, Britney Spears has for the first time requested a legal end to the conservatorship she's been living under and straining against for years. This is reportedly the first time she has formally requested an end to the conservatorship, with her filing saying this is an important step towards, quote, ending the Kafkaesque nightmare imposed upon her by her father, end quote. The filing is calling for her father to be suspended from his role in her conservatorship by September 29th, this coming Wednesday, and the date of the next hiring. Her father agreed to ending his role in the conservatorship earlier this month. Bipartisan negotiations in Congress regarding a police reform bill have collapsed on the floor. The House passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act in March. 2 Democrats and 1 Republican have been working on a Senate bill that might pass. However, after months of back and forth, the two sides seem to not be able to agree and have thrown in the towel. A poll conducted by the Harris has found that 1 in 5 Americans are consuming an unhealthy amount of alcohol since the pandemic began. This goes along with the increased drug usage in the country during the same period, showcasing just how Americans are coping with stress. In international news, Boeing yesterday announced that it would be building its first foreign assembly plant in Australia. specifically building drones in Australia. In Earth and Science news, the White House is set to announce a new limit this morning on the use of hydrofluorocarbons. That's a class of chemicals widely used in refrigerators and AC units. And although they only last in the air for a short time, it's said that they're about 1,000 times more potent at trapping carbon well, not trapping carbon, doing the global warming, the greenhouse gas thing, where basically, it traps heat and light and effectively warms the planet, is the sort of very, very, very simple explanation. In business news, Robinhood, the mobile stock trading app, is adding a crypto wallet to their platform. With the crypto craze hitting America, over half of Robinhood's revenue came from crypto trading last quarter. While it was already possible to trade cryptocurrency on the app, this feature will allow users to access and manage all their coins in one place and buy and sell them easier. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Britney Spears in her filing calling for an end to the quote-unquote Kafkaesque nightmare, quote-unquote. I like the phrasing. And Nicki Minaj, the White House seeking a private line with Nicki Minaj. Anthony Fauci trying to seek a private line with Nicki Minaj. That's one sphere of celebrity this week. The other sphere is Britney Spears using the phrase Kafkaesque nightmare, quote-unquote. I don't know. It's just we live in a weird time with celebrity where suddenly celebrities are like attaining the status, not of intellectuals necessarily, but I don't know. There's something going on there maybe. And at the same time, politicians are seeking celebrity, like we were talking about yesterday with Ted Rall, more than they had been previously, at least.
Like a salacious mix of the two somehow. Yeah. I mean, it's our day and time, I suppose, right? I mean, it's the line between, okay, this guy's a politician, only a politician, is blurring a little bit. And on some level, you can see it. I mean, if you think of social media today and the amount that people are either filmed, videotaped, audio tape, et cetera, you have to have a certain amount of charisma in order to just kind of function. But, at the same time, there's this thing about being serious and that type of thing and whether or not you should have to dumb yourself down in order to get that level of publicity. I mean, even news, our news looks like football games, right? Like, it would be something that's taking place in the world, and it was like breaking news. And it's like, doom, doom, doom. And then they would show this kind of video or something, and it might just be Biden giving a speech at the UN. It's like they amp up the drama and everything else in order to try to draw attention and eyes. So, yeah, I suppose it's a middle ground. What I think we would prefer is a person has a certain amount of charisma, but actually has substance with the charisma to kind of make that work.
Yes.
But we haven't been seeing that too often.
We have not. Well, yeah, no, I don't know.
I mean, like Biden certainly doesn't. I mean, I guess people can make an argument. Democrats will make an argument about Obama, but that depends on whether or not you support whatever he was doing.
I said I was hesitant there, and it took me a second to realize why I was being hesitant. Part of it was, I know a lot of, I know part of what specifically Twitter, but you can argue a lot of social media does, is it makes it a lot easier for you to find a perfect subculture for yourself. You look around and you're like, oh wow, these people are interested into the things I'm into, speaking the same language. They're not dumbing it down. They're not doing the lowest common denominator thing that you were talking about. Yeah. And theoretically, if you can find those all over the place, and I have been able to find all these different interesting smart subcultures, well, then there's this grassroots realm of support. And those people, some of them, the more competent ones, the more statesman-y ones or whatever, could become politicians theoretically if we had a national political system that supported their ascendance. Yeah. But we don't. We have one that tries to restrict politicians very explicitly to, A, the interests of the moneyed investors in whatever party we're talking about, and B, what they think most people are going to find to be electable. I don't know. Maybe that's an inevitability coming from our presidential system, our political system in general. On a national level, you need to appeal to a common basis. But on the other hand, if you allowed some individual, unique leaders to come up, some people, who maybe don't represent everybody, but could convince a lot of people, then you'd probably get some more interesting ideas and impetus and some long-term momentum there. In other words, I think the culture in general might actually respond to highbrow thinking, detailed thinking, complex thinking, not overly complex thinking, but, people actually thinking about things and not dumbing them down into aphorisms and pablum effectively. Yeah. But I don't know. It's just not what our political system seems to want.
No. I mean, I don't know if it's what our political system wants. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just people just, choosing on some level.
But in the parties, in the political system.
Yeah, in the political system. Oh, you mean like as they go through, the primaries and everything else, who gets chosen?
Yeah, I would argue that our political system, along with our media class, by trying to make a simplified narrative that the people will simply go along with and believe in whatever cases, by variously leading us on in some ways, distracting us in others, whatever, they're actually reinforcing the problem that they so often complain about, which is an ignorant public who doesn't know what's true or right or good or whatever. You know what I mean? I feel like I don't know if it's intentional, but it seems like a perverse downward spiral.
However, whether it's intentional or not, it's kind of the way it ends up. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like nuance gets pushed to the side. But keep in mind, part of the reason nuance gets pushed to the side is because people don't necessarily like to be attacked on nuance. Meaning, the moment that you kind of make an argument, you can be perfectly right in that argument, and you can even have a certain degree of, 49-51, stuff like that. But the way you're going to get attacked is not necessarily going to give you credit for the nuance. You're just going to get attacked from the whole thing. So Obamacare, for example, where they would say it is 100% universal health care. Well, Obamacare wasn't universal health care. You still had like 20 million people that were still requiring health care. But Democrats made the argument that this was somehow universal health care because they didn't necessarily want to get hit for not being able to cover everybody. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this is entirely a media space thing. On some level, this is also us. As for subcultures, I mean, the whole idea of a subculture in and of itself is
that you have a subculture, but I hear you.
Isolated and limited.
It is isolated and limited, but if you look at the most interesting revolutions, and I don't mean it in the violent sense, if you look at the most interesting changes in the large-scale political system of any given country, state, whatever, they tend to happen from a subculture, usually among the elites. Usually there's some new way of seeing things, thinking about things that permeates a certain class of people who take the reins of power, and then slowly the culture of the society at large is sort of brought along with them. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. It
just whittles its way in the direction of something different.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. I think that's a fair point.
But also, this is the thing. I mean, this is getting into political philosophy. We shouldn't get too far in that direction. There are people competent enough to talk about that stuff we could bring on as guests. We've got headlines.
Well, quick question. Have you seen, this is something, Macron canceled a speech at the UNGA amid a growing dispute with U.S. over scrapped huge military deal? I didn't know that. I didn't know he canceled the speech.
I saw that Macron and Biden had met.
Yeah.
And that they had agreed to having a meeting next month, and that France had agreed to reinstating its ambassadors here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Which is a decent step forward. That's a big sort of, okay, we'll come back to the table, that kind of thing, after, of course, they withdrew their ambassadors late last week. But I hadn't seen that. That's interesting.
Well, so this is RT. RT is putting this out, and it says Macron canceled a speech on the UNGA. I was looking at Mark Sloboda just to see what was on his timeline and everything else, just since we're going to be talking to him this morning. And yeah, it's, I mean, that's somewhat of a big deal if he basically blew off the speech. This was about 4 hours ago. So yeah, I guess we're still dealing with the fallout of that. I mean, that needs to be fact checked, just to be clear. But I don't think RT would put this up there if it wasn't true. But that's a big deal. I mean, he's basically, I'm not going to give that speech. I'm not going to go out there, which, even though a lot of this stuff is just kind of a wink and a nod, and the world leaders aren't necessarily swayed one way or the other by something that another world leader says, that stuff is probably taking place behind the scenes. This is somewhat of a world platform, a world stage. And even if it was for your own domestic audience, this gets across a certain degree of angst, anger, bitterness associated with it.
Now, the question, I think, and I don't know that we brought this side of it up, how important France, in terms of their rhetoric within the European Union, how much of a bellwether are they actually? Will they lead other countries along with them? They have a strong military. A decently strong economy, of course, up there with Germany, basically, although not quite as strong as far as I know. But culturally, politically, in terms of, being able to convince the other nations, I have heard that they're actually resented. They're not seen as effective leaders. They've gone on this drift to the right. Yeah. And, they've been the site of their own protests, yellow vests, just to start with. Yeah. Big protest movement. That's been going on there. It hasn't really to a nearly similar extent in a lot of the other major countries.
Yeah.
In other words, I was playing up, okay, maybe they'll lead the EU away from the United States, but with this move and just taking a step back, will they actually? I don't know.
Leading the UK from the US.
Leading the EU.
With the EU from the US. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, but leading the EU, I would say this, France, especially with Angela Merkel leaving, is going to be a main power in the European Union. And
you mean the one?
Yeah. Well, I would say one of them, because just because Angela Merkel's leaving doesn't mean Germany is going to all of a sudden lose its kind of stature with it, even though it's not going to have the statesman-like quality.
Well, but won't it then? That's the thing. I think that France...
Well, I mean, because Germany is still a country, and there's still, regardless of the individual figurehead, there's still influence within the context of the European Union. But either way, I mean, you're still going to get a situation where France is going to have a leadership role. There had a leadership role prior, even though Germany seemed to have the strongest suit. I remember there were plenty of investigation is the wrong word for it, but reporting showing how France wanted to take some kind of leadership role, especially with the notion of Merkel in France and Germany and France. But at the point where Merkel is leaving, you would think that France would have a larger share of it just by definition of her not being there, just for being more space to occupy. So I don't know. I mean, I guess my feeling is what we did in this situation may have larger consequences than any negotiation that takes place in the European Union.
Yeah.
Even if it's just France that is angry with us. If we're trying to get some kind of trade deal, if we're trying to get some kind of geopolitical influence, or, even the notion of, hey, we need to have a foreign policy that's separate and distinct from the United States. Well, if France may not necessarily be a bellwether, but it would definitely have a certain degree of influence where it would give us somewhat of a difficult path to hoe in that direction. So I don't know. I think this is going to have consequences that's going to kind of, even though they can't do anything about it immediately and directly and overtly other than just kind of sulk and pull their ambassadors, I think in the future, especially when we need something from Europe or we want to have some kind of negotiation with Europe, this is going to come back to haunt us.
Yeah, well, and this is going to, I think, going to be seen as a kind of apology by Biden too. I don't know what was said in the meeting between Biden and Macron.
Yeah.
But the fact that France withdrew its ambassadors and is now reinstating them after a private meeting with the United States, I can only imagine that Biden's tone was a little bit apologetic.
Yeah, trying to smooth stuff over.
Trying to smooth things over. I'm sorry, that kind of thing. I wasn't fully aware. Something, I don't know exactly what he'd be saying. But stepping back for a second, two things. Ursula von der Leyen had already made the comments about the EU acting independently from the United States in terms of NATO and military intervention, that kind of thing. So that's already happening. That had already happened. That came before this whole fiasco with the subs. But also, coming back to that sub deal for a second, a point that I haven't brought up and I haven't heard made too many places is what was France doing with that deal in the first place? When they made that deal with Australia, they were effectively tying themselves a little bit closer with that deal into the American bloc. They're working with Australia, selling Australia subs. Yeah. Who's Australia on the side of broadly? Well, the U.S., our side of the international community against China, even though it's paradoxical in terms of the interests of the Australian state. France, by doing that deal, had wedged themselves in a little bit more closely with the Americans, is my point. By selling them the subs, they were selling them to an American ally. They're not selling them to the other side. France is at a kind of crossroads here, although they haven't had to take a decisive step, down one of the two roads yet. But by making that decision, they were deciding to ally themselves, to wed themselves a bit more closely to America. And then America turns around and cuts them out of the deal. So it's like they're coming closer to us, and then we push them away hard for, I'm guessing, temporary short-term benefit, basically.
Wait, why do you believe France was coming towards the United States with the deal with Australia?
Because who is Australia allied with, and who are they effectively, through that process, allied against? Who's their enemy? Even though they trade with China constantly, they're part of the U.S.'s military bloc. And by France selling them by France selling them conventional submarines, who are they going to use those submarines against, theoretically?
Oh, I see. That's
what I'm saying.
I see. I don't know. I don't take that as... I would say the deal, or us going with... I would say Australia going with the United States for the deal is more of an indication of association as opposed to just the deal with France. But I do get your point. And I got to be honest, this deal is still weird to me. I mean, basically, I really wish I could be a fly on the wall to see what actually took place with that deal. Because what it seems like is that Australia was going to get subs. They explicitly asked for conventional subs. And then they turned around and said, well, hey, we didn't want the conventional subs. We want nuclear subs, which France is like, the only thing we do is nuclear subs. And not to mention, those subs aren't going to be delivered until like 2040 or something. Anyway, so all of this is kind of strange. All of this is a little weird. And I kind of wish I knew what was going on behind the scenes in regards to the decisions that were being made and why those decisions were being made. Like, did Australia or did France do something that annoyed Australia? Or did France do something that annoyed the States? Like, what on earth created this level of kickback, or this level of action where it would fall apart so acutely.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man.
I don't know the question either. Again, this might be in part a response to the move by von der Leyen.
Yeah.
By the statement by von der Leyen that they were, okay, so you're gonna try to become independent, basically. Well, we'll push your side broadly out. We still have control of things from the American perspective. I don't know, but that's also presuming an intentionality that may not be there.
Yeah.
Like Brave called in to mention, I believe on Monday earlier this week, something like that. There might not, like the Hydra might have more than one head.
Yeah.
There might not. We've been talking about Biden's lack of leadership for what feels like a very long time now. It feels like decades, but practically much less than a year. Biden's not leading things. So who is? Various bureaucracies probably.
Yeah.
And those aren't people. They're composed of people. But what you get is just the result of a conflict of interest and intentions with the different parties arguing and bickering and whatever decision comes out of that machine coming out.
Yeah.
Not with one person being like, this is why we're doing this. This is what we should be doing, that kind of thing.
It's not a concerted plan, the movement forward in a particular direction. It's kind of just everybody's grabbing their hands on the wheel, trying to pull it in a particular direction. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole point of having somebody in charge, right?
Yep.
I mean, this kind of vision and this leadership, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that's decidedly what we don't have.
That is decidedly what the American system has tried to fight against. Like restricting Trump, for instance. This is the big thing with Trump. It's not the culture war stuff, in my opinion. There are other ways of seeing this, but one of the biggest things is saying, okay, there is a deeper set of bureaucracies that ultimately have power over these things that are far more powerful than the president and can stop that president from doing what they want to, basically. And so what are those parties going to look for? What are those organizations going to look for in a president? Somebody who can basically somebody who's pliable, somebody who they can use as a shield for talking about the decisions they're ultimately making, for presenting them to the public to whatever limited degree Biden specifically can. But it's not like they're looking for a leader. They're looking for a follower. They want to be the leaders. Yeah,
they want somebody they can influence. And in Biden's case, invisible man. Invisible man. I mean, even with the Kamala Harris thing, where we were kind of making a point about how she's nowhere to be found. I mean, it's just very weird. For all of the crisis that has been hitting this country over the course of the last several years, you would think that level of leadership would be something that would be necessary, would be almost incentivized. I mean, when you think back to FDR, and he gives that, there's nothing to fear but fear of self-speech. He was talking about something in the middle of the Great Depression. And in the state that we're in, there are multiple things that are going on this level of the Great Depression. I mean, even the COVID thing by itself, the economic crash, or the job stuff, the reorganization, or the foreign policy stuff. All of those things bespeak of difficulties going forward. And yet, the guy who's supposed to be at the center of that, I mean, even the debt ceiling thing, or the government budgeting thing, all of that stuff are issues. And I don't necessarily know if they found a way to extricate themselves from that. Even the deal, the economic plan that Biden himself is pushing, it's unclear whether that's even going to go through at this point. I know Joel Siegel is saying, yes, that's going to go through, et cetera. I don't know about that. I mean, at this point, you have the centrists who are basically saying, yeah, we don't really need to do the other one. And lefties have doubled down on this, saying, look, if you don't do one, neither is going through.
When you say centrist, you mean Manchin, right?
Yes, the mansions of the world.
It's really Manchin.
Cinema. It's a few, in the house.
But yeah, I hear you. But
yeah, and so it's like, that's his own agenda. Let's be clear. Like, that's not somebody else's agenda. That's something that Joe Biden said, okay, this is what I want. This is what I want to push, et cetera. And even in the book, he mentioned that, it's like, dude, you're effing over my agenda and what I'm trying to accomplish. Well, he doesn't necessarily seem to have it in him to push that through, or even to kind of make the political argument, or to give increase or take a political cost in Manchin opposing it. It's just very strange, especially in this situation where you would think, I mean, look, dude, if that's your agenda, you better push it. You better push it. Nobody else is going to push it for you.
But maybe we're a pregnant bear stuck in a bear trap.
Is that what it is?
Maybe we are. And the more that bear struggles to break free, the more it's just going to hurt itself. And what you need to do is to wait for that bear to give birth to something new that will inherently be free. And I know it's a drawn-out metaphor, but basically, maybe trying to do a lot when we're already in this declining mode is just going to aggravate the decline. It's going to make it go worse, and it's going to reduce the chance that we can have something new that we call America come out of this that is America, that's better than it, some new generation of leaders, that kind of thing. I'm talking broadly about a revolution, a peaceful one, where our political system suddenly gets better, a lot better, because there's a class of people who are putting in the work to make it better, that kind of thing. And I'm worried that if we try to pass a bunch of big bills, if we try to get a bunch of stuff done, well, for one thing, I'm not sure that we can, as we're talking about right now. But if we use all our weight to do that, and we don't fix any of the fundamental problems, isn't it just going to drive us ever further into a decline, into a tailspin?
I mean, look, anywhere you are is where you're at, right? And at this point, the tailspin is already taking place and the decline is already taking place. Whether you stand still or whether you try to do something to mitigate some of the worst aspects of it, all things being equal, I don't necessarily like standing still. I would rather try to do something to mitigate the worst aspects, especially for the people who are in the population that are basically going to take the hit from that. You may have elements of the population that are economically secure in a way where that's not going to dramatically affect them. But the fact of the matter is you have a large number of people, 40-something% or more, that are at the very worst ends of that. And if that can be mitigated, it should be mitigated. But that's my take. So, and, you know, it's a secondary question of whether or not these guys are going to be able to do it. I mean, because you might get what you want. You may just have a situation where it doesn't matter that they want to get this stuff passed. And it doesn't even matter that Biden and the Democrats are basically going to lose the House and lose control of the stuff. If they can't get it done, they still may not be able to get it done. I mean, you may get one or two people who say, yeah, I don't want to touch that. No, I'm not going to do that, in which case the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah.
So who knows? I don't know. I would say that it's in Democrats' interests to pass that. But, you know, there's all sorts of things that could be in their interests that they don't necessarily pull off. And at this point, it's unclear on whether or not they're going to be able to push this through. It's just shocking in some level. I mean, especially since they're basically, this is not a Republican thing. Like, this is not like the Republicans are standing in our way of doing this. This is entirely inter-party fighting where they're just completely...
Intra-party.
Yeah,
like within the Democrats.
Yeah, within the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Where they basically don't trust the other. It's very weird. I mean, even the entire point of the bipartisan bill and the reason why they're putting those things together is because they don't believe that they can trust them to push through the budget reconciliation package. And so they're like, all right, both of these things have to go through or nothing goes through. And you get this kind of weird, bizarre mix. And like I said, all of this is taking place within the context of a debt ceiling and a budget or a potential government shutdown. And so, you know, regardless of what they want, even from their own plan, you still could end up with a situation with the government being shut down again for a period of time. And so, yeah, none of this stuff bespeaks of, what's the word, competence or where America matters more. And maybe that does bespeak of a need for this kind of pregnant baby, this bear baby that you were talking about to just go bursting into the world and, you know, whatever that looks like. But I don't know. I mean, at this point, it seems like something has to change, but it doesn't seem like anything is. And maybe this is us not being able to see around corners, if that makes sense, where, you know, sometimes you stumble upon something and we're like, oh, I would have never expected that. Like, for example, I would have never expected to do radio. I was a software engineer for God knows how long. And then all of a sudden it's like a YouTube channel. And it's like, but if you would have told me even like 6 months prior, would have never occurred to me that stuff would have happened. Yeah. I mean, even the COVID stuff, I don't think anybody predicted, in 2019 that 700,000 people would have dropped dead off the face of the earth within the context of a year. And people would have been shut down or they would have been UBIs and stuff like that. I don't think anybody would have predicted that. And so, I don't know, man. It's sometimes things happen in very interesting and weird ways that we can't necessarily predict that have outcomes that are interesting. Sometimes horrible, but sometimes interesting. I would tell you this, though. I am somewhat concerned about this notion of something new because oftentimes, it's the light at the end of the tunnel is a moving bus. It's not necessarily, this kind of going to heaven and everything else. But I don't know. Anywhere we are at this point is where we're at.
I hear you. I'm open on this one too. We have our guests on the line, but I'm reminded briefly of the conversation we were having with Manila Chan yesterday. And there was a point of conflict or whatever that came up at the end that I just decided to move past because we were over time. But she was talking about the debt ceiling, basically, and how it's fictional. She's making the case it's fictional. It's basically an illusion. We could expand it anytime we want to, and we should. And here's my take on that. It depends on who's doing the expansion. Because like a business going into debt, you can use your debt to make very, very profitable decisions. You can use your debt to invest in things that are going to enrich you in the long run. Then you pay your debts off, whatever. And I know the metaphor falls apart because we're our own debtors. Yes. But to a certain extent, we're also creditors and, in a weird way, debtors to the rest of the world. And the strength of our currency as it is able to convert into other currencies, that's a big thing too. And our military propping our currency up, which I would argue it has done for a long time. That's all hanging on the hook as well. And so if we had leaders who are competent enough to use going into debt to make smart, strategic, good short, mid, and long-term decisions that are going to, make America more profitable, whatever, not that that should be the first motivation, but if they can make those kinds of decisions, then all the best. And you want those decisions, of course, to increase radically the welfare of Americans as well. But I just don't trust our current leaders to do that, man. It feels like whatever their intentions are, good, bad, probably a mix, a lot of those big programs would be boondoggles. They wouldn't actually produce the effects that we expect from them, just because the system in general is in long-term decline. It depends on the leaders we have, as it comes down to so much of this stuff, which is why I'm a moderate. I'm not left-right. It's really, you have to look at the specifics, I think.
Yeah, but she's not wrong. The debt ceiling thing isn't really real. I mean, it's a fig leaf of a point. I mean, they suspend it or raise it or increase it whenever they want based upon what needs to be paid.
I get it. It's a bargaining chip.
Unfortunately, yeah. And it was one of those bargaining chips that was never a bargaining chip up until, several years ago.
But America's indebtedness and our rate of inflation, those things are real.
Yes.
And that's where I get that the sort of proximate measure that we're using isn't. Yeah. It's just a convenient political tool that can be moved around the board from one end to the other by each party, as they're trying to move things along.
It's just a weird artifact. I don't even think I mean, it's like, but it's almost like you eat a meal and then the check comes. Well, you just pay for the check. You did eat the meal and you did allocate X amount of spending to be done. But I get your point. I mean, at the end of the day, I think everybody in this country would prefer decent choices that are made that's in the best interest with long-term ideas and investment and direction and everything else. But unfortunately, it has been, 40, 50 years? And that hasn't been the case. And at the very least for the last 20 or 30, $28 trillion or something, some insane amount of money into debt.
It is insane.
Yeah.
We have our guest on the line. Mark Sloboda, international relations and security analyst. We're going to be talking about the UN General Assembly, the state of play in geopolitics right now. What's next with Nato, with recent comments from Ursula von der Leyen, and of course with this move from France. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be joined by Mark Sloboda on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're joined by Mark Sloboda, international relations and security analyst. Mark, how are you doing this morning?
Shane, Jamarl, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Fault Lines.
Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Always an honor and a pleasure to have you on to talk about this stuff. Like I said before we brought you in, talking about the state of play in geopolitics in general right now. This is taking place, of course, as the UN General Assembly is ongoing in New York City this week. We'll be talking more about that in the coming days. And comes after a month and a half, a lot of action in the last month and a half. The absolutely botched withdrawal of America from Afghanistan. It was not received so well by either our allies or much of the world community. They saw what that was, a failed withdrawal like Vietnam, except this time arguably a lot less of an excuse than we had in Vietnam. We had so long to withdraw from this place. We had so long to plan this out. We were not in as nearly a hot war as we were in Vietnam when this happened. In other words, there were less complications. And yet, if anything, we left more people behind, with the last news that I heard being around 100 American, either green card holders or citizens, basically being stranded in Afghanistan. We have no idea literally where they are. That's bad. Then, last week, of course, France, the United States, Australia get into this rhetorical skirmish thing where France had a deal with Australia to develop, build, and sell them conventional submarines. Then the United States poached that deal infamously last week, instead selling Australia nuclear submarines. France got pissed, They decided to withdraw their ambassadors. We heard yesterday that Biden and Macron were able to smooth things over somewhat, and France will be returning its ambassadors. But still, this is a set of blows. And this comes after Ursula von der Leyen said that the EU was basically, I'm paraphrasing, into pursuing military independence, not wanting to depend on the United States' approval for potential military interventions. I'll start with this, Mark. The North American Treaty Organization, NATO, what is the future of that in these tough times? What do you think is going to come of that, Mark?
Well, first of all, NAFTA is itself, of course, actually dead. We're dealing with the predecessor to NAFTA, the deal concocted by Donald Trump with Mexico and Canada.
Wait, Mark, my mistake. I exchanged the word American for Atlantic, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We're talking about NATO.
Okay. I was a bit confused there for a second.
Me too. Slip of the tongue.
That's okay. Okay, so NATO. What is the future of NATO? Very good. NATO's not going anywhere. However much some people, including citizens of the own member states of it, is doing well. Because NATO's original mission, as it was succinctly put by a British diplomat at the time, was to keep the U.S. in Europe, to keep the Soviet Union out of Europe, and to keep Germany down. Of course, to a certain extent, that is all still essentially true. But for the last several decades, since the 1990s, basically, NATO has become a vehicle for U.S. Global power projection in pursuit of U.S.-led Western global military hegemony. And they serve that function very well. They serve both as a political fig leaf of justification, you know, the so-called international community, meaning the U.S. and its allies. This was made very clear by the current UN Secretary, Jens Stoltenberg, when he was defending NATO to Trump a few years ago. And he very specifically pointed out how useful and necessary the European members of NATO were for the U.S. to project military force into the Middle East. Right. Now, of course, that has nothing to do with defense. NATO is not a defensive military organization, despite, you know, the packaging. It has never been used to defend a member of NATO from another state actor because they have never been attacked, and they're not in danger of being attacked by anyone. They are a vehicle for offensive military action now around the globe, and the U.S. is now widening out. The U.S. now has included NATO partners in Colombia and is eyeing Brazil, so that's already going into South America. And they've got these new vehicles for the Pacific that they're gearing up. The Quad, this new AUKUS, this new Australia, UK, US deal, which kind of shafted France out of a in excess of $60 billion deal for building of conventional submarines. So NATO is doing well. NATO is not going anywhere.
Mark, I don't know if you would know this, and I guess this breaks down into two questions. Why screw over Australia in this way? I mean, why screw over France in this way? I mean, at the end of the day, it seemed like it seems like Australia actually did want nuclear subs, despite the fact that they asked for conventional subs. And then to make the excuse later on, oh, we got these nuclear subs from the United States and there was issues with France. It just seems very weird considering France only did nuclear subs in the first place, and they basically had to break their own convention in order to give Australia what they wanted. And on the second front to that is doing that. I mean, considering France's stature in the European Union, especially with Angela Merkel leaving, is this going to have larger consequences for the United States in any kind of negotiations with the European Union? It just seems like it weakens the U.S. hand, especially with von der Leyen making the point about having a foreign policy that's separate and distinct from the United States.
Okay, so why did the U.S. Shaft France over this deal and concoct this deal with Australia and the UK behind France's back, such that the French government reports that they found out about it from social media, which is pretty shocking. I mean, that is a literal stab in the back. So why did they do that? Because it was in their interest to do so. It's that simple. They're in their geopolitical interests against China, as they build yet another anti-China alliance in the Pacific, even or their new geopolitical term to try and draw India into fighting the war against China, the Indo-Pacific. They are doing this, as part of a new military axis to bring military force to bear against China off China's own coast. Right. That is the goal of it. The other one, of course, is economic pork. I mean, pork for U.S. military contractors, and the British on the other side is always, of course, better than going to someone else's military contractors. Why France? Because France was in the way, and the U.S. government, their hubris is such that the reports from the White House in the Western media, the own reporting, the New York Times is reporting that they just didn't think France would be that upset. That's it. Yeah. They do not conceive, right? France is a client state. They should just suck it up, right? Yeah. It's in everyone's best interest. And why is it everyone's best interest? Okay, so this new AUKUS deal has a lot of things to it. There's a lot of new heightened intelligence sharing, and a big part of why France can't be involved in this. They're talking the Five Eyes global spying cabal.
Although New Zealand didn't like this one.
Yeah, New Zealand doesn't like this one because it is still principally against nukes, but I expect New Zealand will fold in the coming years on that issue. But the Five Eyes is about the 5 Anglophone countries, the U.S., the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, that agree to share intelligence, and specifically the intelligence that is tapped via global telecommunications cables, right? And their deal is, this has been revealed in leaks via WikiLeaks and others, that they basically get around prohibitions about spying on their own citizens' communications in mass by getting each other to spy on each other's citizens via access to these telecommunications cables, and then just sharing the data around. I mean, that's how they get around it. And this has been well written about. It's just something that in practice is ignored. But this strengthens that intelligence sharing. And it also includes some missile deals and so on. But the main question, particularly with these nuclear subs, the question is, how long can Australia support a U.S. war with China by how long it can park its submarines off China's coast in the South China Sea? That's what it really comes down to, because a conventional sub leaving Australia and going into the South China Sea can only stay on operational duty for 11 days because they need to refuel, while a nuclear submarine can get into the South China Sea and remain on operational duty there for 77 days without needing to come back up simply to get provisions for the crew.
So that's a direct comparison between the types of weapons, but there are another couple of complicating things, which is why I'm gonna bring them up. France has nuclear submarines, the only country in the EU, in fact, to have nuclear submarines. The UK does too, but again, I'm talking about the European Union there. That would be the natural thing for them to sell Australia. And yet they had to develop new designs for conventional submarines to sell to the Australians, which is weird. So from the Australian side, I don't know if it's cost, which doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why they would pivot sort of at the last moment. But from the American perspective, it might be in the rational best interest of a kid to try to steal a cookie from the cookie jar and in the process knock the cookie jar over. But for a mature adult, you'd realize, okay, that's actually not going to work, and there are better ways of procuring cookies than stealing them from your mother. It's a silly analogy, but for the United States, you're saying it's in the best interest of the United States. Isn't this a sort of retrenchment? Aren't we drawing back our investment? That's the way I've been seeing it, at least. drawing back our investment in the EU, trying to create this new Anglophone alliance, which I presume would have been a part of our international community, a part of our sort of ring of alliances in general. It seems like we're, in some sense, thumbing our nose at the EU. And again, von der Leyen's comments looking for military independence, I don't know if this is related to that, but it seems like they are trying to, go their own way, at least to some extent. They're still dependent, of course, on the U.S. in terms of NATO for so much of the military spending, but they're trying to go their own way. And it seems like we're happy to let them do that. It seems like we're pushing away in our own way, too, trying to create, this new Anglophone alliance. We're trying to re-solidify it. What's your take on that, Mark?
Okay, so the U.S. has long considered the EU politically unreliable for their coming, what they view as inevitable, no matter what Biden's rhetoric about we don't want a new Cold War, what U.S. geopolitical thinkers and military brass regard as an inevitable naval conflict with China in the next 5 to 15 years off China's own coast in the Taiwan Straits and South China Sea. They regard the EU as unreliable for that. And this is about strengthening the alliances and the forces that they think they can bring to bear. They don't expect, France as a member of NATO to significantly back out of other military commitments, but they already felt that they couldn't rely on the EU for this. And let's face it, the EU, other than France, has no military capability, certainly not to project power behind its borders. Not anything that anyone considers significant, and they are unlikely to do so at any time in the future.
Yeah, but why? I guess the question is, it seems that the European Union is trying to make a demarcation point from the U.S. foreign policy. I mean, whether it's Afghanistan and the comments that was taking place after that, meaning Germany, France, the UK, or like we mentioned, von der Leyen, who's talking about the foreign policy separate from the U.S. What is the reason for this kind of, I guess, sudden change in perspective or sudden change in point of view? I mean, is this just from multiple events that have taken place, including Donald Trump taking office and everything else? Or is there something else that's deeper that, does this go deeper than just these kind of optical things that might have taken place over the last few years?
Yeah, I think that this is not new and coming, but nor should we really overstate it. There are political differences between and geopolitical differences between U.S. goals, the goals of U.S. political elite, and the goals of the European political elite, but they also largely coincide. And do you remember the fury expressed by the UK and the EU when the U.S. pulled its forces so propitiously as they saw it out of Afghanistan? Mm-hmm. They were very angry because they expect their hegemonic leader to act in a certain way. And they thought with Biden coming to office and Trump gone that leader would act more like they thought he would. And they were very upset about this. But the U.S. is as capable as looking at the polling of, the opinions of the people of Europe outside of their political elite as well as anyone else. And they see very clearly that, the Europeans don't want to go to war with other countries. They don't even, according to the polls, we're talking Germany, we're talking some big European countries, the majority of their citizens do not even want to go to war to defend other members of the NATO alliance.
Which is,
right? They're like, that's none of our business.
Not exactly an alliance at that point, in a deeper sense. But here's the thing, Mark.
Well, I mean, that's sociological. Of course, the political elite are the ones that really run the foreign and military policy of the country, not the people.
Well, and that's even if they're paying attention to the polling, it doesn't mean they need to follow it. Doesn't mean they need to pay any direct attention to it. And of course, and
U.S. never has.
That's the thing. Yeah, it was about
Right, yeah.
We each have our own respective ivory towers, and they're conjoined at the top. They've got a couple of bridges in between them. But the EU does have a lot to gain from investment and trade deals with China, and the United States wants to keep them out of it. That's, you said that we have the same interest. Yes. That is a huge interest that's, running we're running athwart theirs and they're running athwart ours. In other words, we disagree over this thing. It isn't that the crucial thing that we're talking about. That's how I would see NATO falling. The trade deals with Russia, trade deals with China, forgetting, recent decades of tension, building up of tension. That's the pivot that I could see coming, and it seems to me that's one of the potential consequences of this whole weird time we're in right now. I don't want to overstate it. Please forgive me if I am, but I think it is a big deal. The botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, recent comments from von der Leyen, and this thing. What do you think? What do you think I'm overestimating what's going on there, Mark?
No, I think you're overestimating the split, a geopolitical split between the U.S. and Europe. I think that the U.S. is definitely trying to push economic decoupling with China very strongly on Europe with mixed results. With mixed results, right? Huawei has largely been banned from the continent. They were pretty successful with that, and as a result, all of the West is going to be way behind on 5G technology and deployment, because of it. But that's their choice because they want to keep their own access to the spying of telecommunications cables, and that becomes more difficult if those new connections are being constructed by a Chinese telecommunications company. So it's understandable. I mean, they want to be able to continue spying on you, on their own people.
Let's pivot for just slightly. Joe Biden's UN speech. Now, Joe Biden made the speech basically saying that he's not looking for another Cold War. And, of course, the Cold War, I would argue, has already started. I mean, we're basically screaming that China is committing genocide. Now, in his head, he calls that deep competition. Everybody else basically calls that a Cold War. By the same token, some of this is conflicted messaging, though. I mean, him wanting to have the meeting with Putin and him going for Geneva, and then even the conversation where he seems at wanted a phone call with Xi Jinping in regards to China. I mean, some of that stuff gets across bringing down, I guess, hysteria. But at the same token, every other action that's taken place, even from the standpoint of military, especially the weapons in space that these guys are about to disclose, gets across that they are preparing for some kind of conflict. Why the contradictory statements versus actions in this case?
Well, that's just the way PR works. That's for public consumption, right? That's what you tell the plebes. I mean, they can look at it from the Chinese perspective, right? Okay, so we realize that Trump was gearing up, started a sanctions war against China, an economic war, force other countries to stop doing trade with them, continued the Obama-era military buildup in the Pacific, started this new Quad. And what happens when Biden comes in? Biden continues doing military parades off the Chinese coast through the Taiwan Straits and the South China Sea. It accelerates. It's talking about new weapons, and now they're talking about diplomatic recognition of Taiwan, something that Trump started talking about and Biden administration is still talking about. And that they will promote separatism of Taiwan from China, flying in the face of long-standing U.S. one China policy, right, which helped win them the first Cold War. So they're selling more and more advanced weapons to Taiwan. They're stationing new missiles in the Pacific. They're stationing new forces in the Pacific. Biden has leveled new sanctions against China, much less reversing any of the old ones. And at the same time, the U.S. is saying, and they just constructed a new anti-China alliance, this AUKUS, which is, specifically again about at one level just putting Australian nuclear subs against China, and at the same time, the U.S. is saying they don't want any new Cold War. I mean, it's a lie.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, sure, they don't want a new Cold War in that they would just like China to give up pursuit of a powerful military and become a U.S. client state. I mean, in that sense, of course, you can say it, right? Like the U.S. says it supports the territorial integrity of Syria while it militarily occupies East Syria and sits on Syria's oil and wheat fields.
Well, I guess the question is, do you think this the potential for sleepwalking into a war or larger conflict? This was one of the conversations we were having on the channel, I think yesterday, where what are the potential chances for kinetic war between these parties? I mean, frankly, I got to be honest, I'm somewhat concern that we can sleepwalk into a conflict, that even though they may not vocally or openly, let's say, push for it, that you can create political situations, especially a certain degree of brinksmanship, that drags us into a situation where the political leaders can't step back from and gets us more involved.
We were speaking with Manila Chan, and she was saying basically, and I kind of agreed with her, but Jamarl over the weekend, it almost convinced me. She was saying there are reasonable people in the room. At the end of the day, a lot of this bluster is rhetoric, but, you know, they won't start something because that would be cataclysmic. And I would like to think that she's right, but Jamarl had managed to, you know, give me another side of it, which is no, people specifically overreact all the time.
Yeah, I don't think you have to worry at all about the U.S. sleepwalking into a war with China in the West Pacific. I don't think there's any danger of that at all because there's no sleep involved.
Yeah.
It is wide opening. We are going and preparing for a conflict with China in every single way possible and politically and economically pushing to ensure that it happens.
And is that insane?
Right now, China has, you've probably heard some news about the possibility of China constructing new nuclear weapons. Right.
Yes.
Right now, China has an estimated, officially about 200 nuclear weapons, and possibly a 100 or so higher than that, but only a small amount of which are capable with ICBMs of hitting U.S. territory, and that the way China, they are still using solid fuel right at the moment, which means that their prep time is much higher. We're talking 30 minutes or more. The U.S. figures that in case a conventional conflict with China in the South China Sea, which they view, right, they talk all the time, U.S. geopolitical thinkers and brass, about a Thucydides trap, right, the ancient Greek political philosopher. You have a failing hegemon and a rising hegemon, potential hegemon, and conflict is inevitable.
I think it was Athens and Sparta in the case of Thucydides.
Yes, yes, and you know, the U.S. cast itself as Athens, as a naval power, of course, and it views that it needs to contain China, right? And the win-win scenario of Chinese, you know, of everyone benefits from each other's economy. You know, the U.S. doesn't talk about that anymore because China's economy is growing more powerful than the U.S. And they feel the only way that they can reverse that is militarily, because they still, for another decade or, you know, 10 to 15 years, still have that advantage. And they're looking to make sure it continues that way. But control of China's naval routes, because it's an import-export country, for resources and fuel going in is important to them.
And that's why the South China Sea, the conflict over that is crucial.
Yes.
And even Myanmar, there's a way in which that is of major geopolitical significance, although as far as I know, so far the major powers haven't intervened too directly in this recent batch of that conflict. We're almost out of time, and I love the variance of opinions. Again, Manila Chan disagreeing on the other side. I think Carl Jha, we'll be speaking with him next hour. I think he was saying that basically a lot of the spending here is grift. I don't know whether he would say that it's all grift, you know, whether he thinks, you know, what he thinks about this, but I do quite like it. Mark, thank you for joining us this morning. Great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
For those listening, that was the voice of Mark Sloboda, international relations and security analyst. Do go follow him on Twitter at Mark Sloboda1. Also find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be coming back in a minute with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning show. See you on the other side of this short break.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would insist, at least strongly so, that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Right on. Great conversation with Mark. Always a bit disconcerting. But yeah, I mean, looking over like military planning and stuff like that, it seems that they are preparing. You know, I would hope if it happens, it would be a sleepwalk. But, you know, unfortunately, many of the leaders that are dealing with military policy and stuff don't seem to be sleepwalking.
No. Like I said, interesting to hear all these different takes. And Mark recommended just now, you know, we're talking briefly, thanking him for coming on and everything. Yeah. And he's like, hey, you guys should have me on with a panel with Carl Jha and Manila Chan.
Ooh.
And that would be fantastic.
That would be great.
The variance of opinions, they know what they're talking about. You get all these different sides in on it. Anyway, we'll come back to that idea.
Put a pin in that. That's great.
Yep.
All right, let's get to the headlines. In the news, about 145,655 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were 2,784 deaths reported. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 130,592 cases per day, a decrease of 12% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 55% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 64% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 42,550,035 people across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 681,341 men, women, and children. I also want to point out that this death number seems to be getting higher each day. I believe yesterday it was 2,600, and the day before that, I think it was 24 or 25 or 2,600. This is appalling. This is appalling. New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is pushing for her country to get as close to 90% vaccination rate as possible. This comes after the country's health minister said the country would likely not be able to reach zero cases following a year of almost entirely successful zero-tolerance policy for restricting the spread of SARS-CoV-2 with tight national lockdowns and the help of New Zealand being an island. On this episode of, quote, "What stupid thing is Gen Z doing now?" unquote, we have a popular social media trend beginning. 1, is it putting random bra in their dad's dirty laundry? B, huffing antiseptic to treat COVID-19, or C, trying to drink a shot through the nose with trying to drink a shot through their nose with straws. I guess the answer to this is B. The dangerous trend, hydroperoxide and nebulizer, and then just breathing it, is going viral on social media. Health experts, and journal universities are warning against this practice. That is horrendous.
They're vaping a disinfectant, basically.
Yes.
The nebulizer, basically a kind of vape, and hydrogen peroxide, of course, that like a dark brown, purple, viscous solution that is often used as a disinfectant. They're vaping that.
Wow.
These kids these days.
All of this because of like COVID? I mean, they think this is somehow going to stop COVID, or they're just doing this for kicks? I mean,
they just like how it tastes. You know?
Wow. It's
COVID. I'm pretty
That's so unfortunate. That's so unfortunate. Man. All right, let's keep going. Yesterday, the FDA authorized Pfizer booster shots for people 65 and older and other at-risk groups. This comes not long after the FDA committee overwhelmingly agreed the boosters are, as of now, not necessary for the majority of people. Biden announced yesterday that America will be doubling its donations of vaccines to the global effort to reduce the severity of COVID-19. Yeah, I think we were talking, was it yesterday or the day before, on how this idea that, the fact that we're withholding this in some weird way. Like, we're not allowing the other countries to basically get the technology and start building this stuff themselves. The drug companies are basically holding on to this with grim death. And so I would imagine there's a certain amount of pressure that's on the wealthier nations, particularly the United States, about not giving this stuff out, or the way it hasn't been giving this stuff out. And at this point, I guess they're trying to push for it. Not to mention China has actually done a pretty decent job in giving out their vaccine shares. So, yeah, got to catch up. In a court filing yesterday, Britney Spears has for the first time requested a legal end to the conservatorship she's been living under and straining against for years. This is reportedly the first time she has formally requested an end to the conservatorship, with her filing saying this is an important step towards, quote, ending the Kafkaesque nightmare imposed upon her by her father, unquote. The filing has called for her father to be suspended from this role of conservatorship by September 29th, this coming Wednesday, and the date of the next hiring. Her father agreed to end his role in the conservatorship earlier this month. Bipartisan negotiations in Congress regarding a police reform bill have collapsed on the floor. The House passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in March. 2 Democrats and 1 Republican have been working on a Senate bill that might pass. However, after a month of back and forth, 2 sides seem not to be able to agree and have thrown in the towel. And at this point, the question becomes, what is Joe Biden going to do, or if Joe Biden has any power to do anything from the executive directive way. But at this point, no progress. Florida has been following in Texas pro-life footsteps very soon, or maybe following in Texas pro-life footsteps very soon. A Republican lawmaker has proposed a near identical bill preventing most abortions past 6 weeks of pregnancy. Under the bill, anyone who successfully sues an abortion provider will be given at least $10,000 to be paid out by the offending physician. Let's come back to that. That's weird. I mean, you're basically allowing random people to sue a doctor when somebody else gets an abortion. That sounds so strange. A poll conducted by the Harris has found that 1 in 5 Americans are consuming an unhealthy amount of alcohol since the pandemic began. Makes sense? This goes along with the increased drug usage in the country during the same period, showcasing just how Americans are coping with the stress. Boeing yesterday announced that it will be building its first foreign assembly plant in Australia. Afghans are facing an imminent humanitarian catastrophe, says the World Health Organization official. Nearly 1 in 4 COVID hospitals have shut down in the country due to the massive lack of funding since the Taliban took over. This is occurring as the UN's World Food Program found that only 5% of households in Afghanistan have enough food to eat every day. Wow. The White House is set to announce a new limit this morning on the use of hydrofluorocarbons, a class of chemicals that are widely used in refrigerators and AC units. I remember when we had the hole in the ozone layer. Do you remember that? Were you around during that time?
These actually replaced a previous class of chemicals that were aggravating that problem.
Yeah.
They replaced ones that were depleting the ozone. It wasn't hydrofluorocarbons. It was like another fluorocarbon.
Yes.
But they replaced it with hydrofluorocarbons, which are apparently potent greenhouse gases.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily
in order to get rid of
better.
one problem, they ended up creating another.
Exactly.
As what seems an ironic response to this, a lab in Purdue University has just created the world's whitest paint. Their goal was to combat climate change, and as a byproduct, broke the world record. The paint reflects 98.1% of solar radiation cooling surface below the surrounding temperature, without the use of electricity. A 1,000 square foot roof coated in this paint has a 10 kilowatt cooling power, more powerful than air conditioners used by most houses. Wow, that's just paint. Robinhood, the mobile stock trading app, is adding crypto wallet to their platform. With the crypto craze hitting America, over half of Robinhood's revenue came from crypto trading in the last quarter. While it was already possible to trade cryptocurrencies on an app, this feature would allow users to access and manage all of their coins in one place, buy and sell them much easier. You guys, those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Those are your headlines. You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Excellent. So the humanitarian crisis thing, I saw the story, I believe it was yesterday. This kind of gets to what we were talking about, with Afghanistan and whether or not, the paths that this can take. Are we going to allow the country to basically slide off of a cliff, which I would put to you that all sorts of monsters will come out of it if we let that place slide off of a cliff? Or are we going to have some level of due diligence to deal with the fact that we've been at war with that country for the last 20 years, blowing stuff up and knocking people off. This is horrendous. I mean, 1 in 4 hospitals have shut down. And I would imagine there probably weren't that many hospitals to begin with in Afghanistan, especially probably not all of that level of sophisticated hospitals. I would imagine some in Kabul, but I would have a hard time believing in the rest of the country. And even within the context of something that's probably already limited in regards to their capacity for medical care, well, 1 in 4, 25% are basically no more. That's horrendous. And even the 5% food stuff, only 5% of households in Afghanistan have enough food to eat every day. This is not good. This is not good at all.
What are we going to do about it?
That's the question.
And who are we going to blame on it? I mean, who are we going to blame this on? You know, are we going to blame this on the Taliban?
Well, I mean, it's not an issue of blame to me. I mean, they've been at war for God knows how long.
It'll become, my point is blame, okay, blame is relevant when it's used as a way to dismiss the story. When it's used as effectively a stop sign for your mind, go no further, that kind of thing, a permanent red light. Okay, I'll put it like this. If it's not our responsibility, if we blame it on somebody else, if that becomes a sort of tacit narrative, either stated clearly or more likely unstated, what's that going to do? It means that we're going to ignore it. We're not going to feel like we have any responsibility for it. We like, not like we have anything to do to help it.
Yeah,
that's where that comes in. And so I see it being likely that this is going to continue. Hopefully, they'll get some aid deals struck up with China and other near neighbors in the region.
Yeah.
But we'll see if we pitch in. And I'm guessing that in the West, we'll paint that as, oh, look at, this is how poorly the Taliban is running the country after they violently took it over. We tried for decades to help them. This is what they're doing with it.
That's what we did to Iraq, right? I mean, at a certain point, it was like, oh, we tried everything we could to help the Iraqis. But, this is, it's probably going to be something similar. And the fault thing, I understand your point when you're saying, who's like at fault and how that's going to be used to kind of either ignore the issue or just kind of bypass the issue. I would say this, though. Under normal circumstances, things that happen may affect us even if we don't do anything about it. And, for all of the talk about Afghanistan being used as a terrorist haven and everything else, look, if you want to see something like that definitely take hold, leaving that country to fall off of a cliff would be the way to do it. And so I really do hope that some of the other countries in the region kind of step in to assist on something like this. I mean, they're still human beings at the end of the day, despite whatever religious, ideological things that may be going on. The other story that's interesting to me is the alcohol story. 1 in 5 Americans are consuming an unhealthy amount of alcohol since the pandemic began. Now, that kind of makes sense. There's all sorts of stress where people are basically stuck in the house for over a year. There's all sorts of this, I don't want to call it hypochondria, but there's definitely this awareness that 40-something million people have been infected with the virus, that 700,000 have died, and that ultimately any of us on some level could be susceptible to getting either ill, getting sick, or for that matter, dying. That level of pressure that's just kind of there, this ever-present thing. And then you add into it where some people were out of a job, some people were basically stuck at home and working and living at home. And if you are at home working constantly, well, you have just more propensity and more opportunity to either drink or do some kind of drug or anything else. So I guess that kind of does make sense in retrospect. But that doesn't necessarily seem to be the best way to deal with the stress of all of this. By the same token, I'm not quite sure what other way to deal with it. It's just,
sleep more, exercise, those kinds of things. I mean, I say this, I said literally yesterday, I was trying to cut down on my drinking.
Yeah.
Not like overboard, but it's like, I shouldn't be using this as a de-stressor as so many people do, because functionally, this gets a little bit philosophical, but like it numbs you, it numbs your mind. What are you doing when you drink? Often you're like doing it to detach yourself from your problems. And that can be healthy, but at the same time, it's a poison technically, and it keeps you from getting good sleep. It lowers your testosterone, which it does. But mostly it keeps you from getting good sleep. It means that you don't constantly rejuvenate yourself at night like you're supposed to. That's actually another epidemic, but it's another topic, how little sleep people get. And I don't mean to single you out. So again, different people are different. But that's, what else do you do? Try to live a slightly healthier life.
I guess the thing is, it seems that there is no demarcation point for the COVID stuff. I mean, it honestly does feel like this is just going persistently into the future.
A Kafka-esque nightmare.
Pretty much,
to quote Britney Spears' legal filing.
What her dad is basically saying. What she's basically saying.
About her
dad,
so
at a certain point, you almost have to accommodate the new changeover. Like it's one thing, it's almost like a new norm.
But from what? Becoming alcoholics? What
No.
What does that mean? What are you talking about?
No, it's like not trying to be persistent alcoholics. No, I just mean, I guess to back up your point somewhat, this level of stress isn't going anywhere. Like it's not a situation where it's like, okay, in a year, this is gone. This is not going to be an issue going forward. We don't know that. In fact, not just don't we know that, it is very possible and likely even that there are going to be some new variant or some new condition that takes place that pumps the number back up again where we're back at 3,000, 4,000. I mean, for God's sake, we were at a point where we turned a corner where the deaths had dropped down to like hundreds, a few hundred a day. And we're back up to 2,600, 2,700. And so it's like, how does a population deal with stress in a persistent basis when there doesn't necessarily seem to be a demarcation point from the crisis that is causing that level of stress?
I'll get selfish for just a second, if you'll permit me to.
Go for it.
And sometimes I'm selfish for more than a second on this show. But I'll put it like this, man. I've been wanting to get into a relationship for a while. Now, how do you do that normally? Okay, maybe you strike something up online. You can use dating apps. But the best, in my opinion, the best way to do it is you just get out there. You put yourself in situations, in social situations. Yeah. You're meeting new people. You're circulating. It's a good thing to do. You can't exactly do that in COVID right now unless you're willing to be a little bit irresponsible. And I work with somebody who has serious long-term immunity issues where if I got COVID, even if I didn't suffer any effects, I might get you sick and you might suffer serious permanent effects or possibly, unlikely, but possibly die.
Yeah.
So I don't want to do that. But what does that mean? The last year and a half, I've basically been stuck indoors. Is it going to last for another year? For how many more years?
Aggravating.
And I'm being selfish. I'm just focusing on myself in that case. But this, of course, applies to so many other people. So people are left with choice. Do I live my life in the sense in which I'm supposed to live my life, in the sense that, get out there, meet other people, hang out with other people, be a part of society and not just, a part of my social media platforms, whatever? Or do I be very responsible and stay indoors and stay away from other people in this sort of cold and inhuman way that we've gotten used to doing? It's a tough choice. And frankly, I don't blame anybody for answering that question in either way. It's a tough question you got to answer. I blame our public officials for not managing this thing more effectively from the beginning so that we're having to make this choice again and again and again. Who knows how many years down the line,
Yeah, I think you got to live your life. And I think you try to mitigate to the degree that's possible with yourself getting sick or somebody else is getting sick. But I mean, if this goes for like 4 years, 5 years, like at a certain point, it becomes untenable to kind of keep this, I don't know. At a certain point, it's just going to have to be accepted as a new norm as opposed to something that we're just kind of waiting out. Because at this point, it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere anytime soon. But I totally understand it. I don't blame anybody for trying to live their life in this situation. But let's do this. Well, let's come back with Carl Ja. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show.
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. In the conversation with Mark, we had this back and forth over this military preparedness in regards to the way that the United States and some of its allies have been using or working to mitigate and to basically threaten China. One of these things that hit the media recently was AUKUS, this kind of deal between the United States and Australia and the UK, where they basically cut France out of a $60 billion deal. France pulls its ambassadors, and there was a war of words that was taking place. But at the end of the day, this deal was done with the notion of mitigating, threatening China. To have a conversation about what this could mean, because the question is, does this allow China some kind of inroads in the European Union, considering France, one of the major countries of the European Union, was a country that was basically shafted? And how would this affect China's influence in Europe? To have a conversation, we're joined with Carl Jha. Carl Jha is host of Silk and Steel podcasts focused on China and surrounding region and history, culture, and politics. You can follow him on Twitter at Carl Jha and on podcasts on Twitter at Silk Steel In. And subscribe and support the podcast on patreon.com/Silk and Steel. Carl, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So I'm aware, I know you've seen this deal with AUKUS and basically the nuclear sub deal that the United States shafted, I suppose, France, at the very least from France's perspective anyway. This is pretty interesting because we didn't necessarily seem to care of what France's response was going to be in this. And, you know, at this point, they're only doing this, meaning the U.S., as a way of basically threatening China. I mean, otherwise the deal doesn't entirely make all that much sense. And so from China's standpoint, I mean, this goes into a few directions in regards to dealing with a belligerent nation, but it also deals with, you know, China and Australia and that relationship. What is China's point of view on this? Let's start there. Let's start at the very basics. What has China said in relation to this particular deal, considering China has to know that this deal was basically done with it being in the crosshairs?
Well, I mean, China obviously is not very happy about it, but this just further confirmed to China that Australia has really bind itself onto the U.S. war wagon, right? It's something to be expected, but this is just this now is in a formal alliance, right? The AUKUS, and as for you know, whether U.S. put this, well, the stated goal for U.S. is the alliance to counter China, but we have to be realistic here. The original French deal for $66 billion, France was supposed to deliver its first submarine to Australia in 2034, right? And right now, we don't even have a timeline for when U.S. is going to deliver its first. I thought
it was like 2040
submarine.
Or something to that effect. Like, it's way out there by several decades.
I mean, like at the current, if the current trajectory persists, if the current trend persists, you know, China in 2040 or 2046 is a whole different animal than China of 2021. Right, just like China of 2021 is very different from China 20 years ago, back in 2000. I mean, like back in 2000, nobody would even seriously entertain the thought that China could be a peer competitor to United States. I mean, 20 years is a long time, and you know, to be honest, this. What the substance of the agreement is really is that you know, Australia will allow U.S. to use it as basically a military base to counter China. You know, like Australia will probably get some knowledge sharing about nuclear sub from U.S. and U.S. will be able to send its nuclear submarines to ports in Australia. These are not. I wouldn't say China was entirely caught by surprise, but they're probably surprised by the extent that Australia would you know, go to bat for United States, considering that Australia's largest trading partner is China. If you look at the export and import number of Australia, the trade numbers between Australia and China and Australia and United States, it's not even close. I mean, it's like China is by far the largest market for Australia, and you'll make a serious dent in Australian economy if China go seek out alternative sources for iron ore or for coal. So, Australia is really going against its own national interests here.
Well, and it's kind of being torn like across a bed of Procrustes. It's being torn in multiple directions. On the one hand, by the need for some defense, which it hasn't been able to attain on its own. And of course, it's dependent on the United States for that. But on the other hand, economically, and I think that's the real driver in the long term here, like you're saying, largest import and export partner it finds in the form of China. I want to turn to France for a second. For a minute there, it seemed like France and China were both aggrieved by the same party, and in the same way that the enemy of your enemy is your friend, at least ostensibly, there was the chance that they were going to, sidle up alongside each other and team up in a bigger way. I'm not saying that would happen immediately, but it was suggestive that in the long run, that could be happening. From the Chinese perspective, how likely do you think that is? What obstacles do you see there being to that? What's the take there, Carl?
I think the ball is in France's court right now. I mean, China would very much like to build a bridge to Europe. And if you look at the China's Belt and Road Initiative, if you look at where the new Chinese new Silk Road project end up, all the endpoints points to Europe, right? China very much like to have just build economic partnership with EU, but as we know, EU. Because of the NATO, the structure of NATO, it's another very similar to Australia in a way. It is a torn priorities, right? But France, it's interesting because France had a history of quitting NATO, not completely because they had the 20-year binding agreement, but former French President de Gaulle did downgrade the relationship back in 1960s. And also back in 1960, I believe it's 1962 or 1963, the Nassau Agreement between US and UK when President Kennedy agreed to supply Polaris submarine-launched ballistic missiles to UK for UK's nuclear deterrent program. Again, Charles de Gaulle cited that as a reason to veto UK's entrance into the European Economic EEC, which is a predecessor of EU. So that was in 1963. So France does have these kind of streaks of going its own way, but how far? I think that will depend on. One thing to note, though, the people in France that had the most stake in this nuclear deal with Australia are the Atlanticist wing of the France political establishment. So the people who most wanted to build the ties with NATO and build and to cooperate with U.S. in the so-called Indo-Pacific region, it's that wing got shafted. This
was a point that I was making earlier, and you were right for using the word Atlanticist. I think clarifies things slightly, but basically, I saw France with this deal as wedding themselves further to the American side of things. In this larger long-term contest between America and China, Russia, the sort of new Eurasian bloc forming. By doing this deal with Australia, well, Australia would be using those submarines as effectively a proxy of the United States in long-term skirmishes with China, ostensibly. That's what would be happening there. So by overturning this deal from the American side, I've come to see that as sort of us thumbing our nose at France in a completely counterintuitive and arguably unfortunate way. If you take the side of the Atlanticists, they tried to push themselves a little bit more closely into the American camp. They were showing the Americans, okay, we'll work with you guys here. We'll benefit your allies. We'll be a part of the same team. Instead of doing like they did back in 2010, France, major arms exporter, they tried to sell arms to Russia. And of course, the United States didn't like that. They never delivered on them. Eventually, they refunded Russia. But that was a time where they were sort of testing the waters. They were pushing for a little bit more neutrality, independence, that kind of thing. They were pulled back from that, and they were doubling down on wedding themselves to the American side. So for the United States to undercut them like this, it doesn't make any sense. This isn't exactly do you have any speculation? I'm curious, from your perspective, why we did this, why the Americans made this move.
think that even the whole anti-China stance of United States, when it comes down to it, it's still about grift. It's still about trillion dollar defense money going to the arms manufacturers, its various lobbies, and basically feeding the U.S. Military industrial complex. And that is why this deal is such a big deal between France and United States, because the original French submarine deal with Australia actually included partners with U.S. firms. Mm-hmm. But at this point, U.S. just showed that it completely does not care what French stake and what French interests are. This is really it all comes down to dollars, right? Follow the money. Like U.S. military industrial complex has shown itself it being so greedy that you will totally screw any kind of long-term strategic interest and just trying to grab all the money for itself. I think that's what's going on here. I mean, like I said, even the submarine deal, like delivering a nuclear sub to Australia in 2046 is not going to significantly alter the balance in the Indo-Pacific, when it comes to countering China. But what it does is bind the Australian and the U.S. military industrial complex together.
That much closer together. I mean, it makes sense from the U.S. interests, right? I mean, from the standpoint of, okay, this is contracts that we're going to get, fine. And we don't necessarily believe that Australia can do anything. I mean, that France can do anything other than sulk. But from the Australian side, it is a little strange. I mean, they specifically asked for conventional subs, and then they turn around and accept nuclear subs from the U.S., not to mention the timeline is even that much further out. And from the standpoint of NATO, I'm curious, from China's point of view, China knows that this is against them. And Mark Milley, even though I know you said this is more about grift, and that's perfectly fine, but you have many of the military planners that are actively looking at a hot war to take place over a period of time, meaning from the standpoint of some kind of naval conflict. And even Mark Milley, I believe is the name's pronounced, when he was going behind the scenes in order to talk to his Chinese counterpart, well, he was doing that because there was concern that he was looking at various intelligence where China couldn't necessarily tell what was taking place in the United States, especially after January 6th. And they believed that there was a potential for some kind of attack. And he was trying to basically bring down the hysteria on that particular mindset. I guess the point that I'm making here is, even though for people who are basically in the economic area of this, it may be a grift, there are people on both sides who are looking at this as a potential for some kind of hot war or hot conflict. How is China going to deal with the belligerent superpower in this case? Meaning, what's their policy, the geopolitical policy of dealing with a belligerent superpower?
I think from China's perspective, China has really, I mean, for the longest time, China has been trying to build partnership with United States. I think they realized that boat has sailed really during the Trump administration. I mean, Biden just continued all the Trump's China policies. So at this point, China will just continue on its own path of continually build its military capability. I mean, Chinese Navy is expanding at a very rapid rate. That's often cited by the U.S. Navy as a reason why U.S. Navy needs more funding. Right now, there's actually, if you believe what those think tanks are producing, Chinese Navy is on the path to have more tonnage than the U.S. Navy, if not today, but in the very immediate future. So I think China will continue the buildup. This is regardless the U.S. stands. China has been doing on the path of military modernization since 1990s, really after the first Gulf War, because that is a war that really shocked and awed the Chinese military planners, and especially after U.S. Bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in Serbia in 1999, I believe. That's when China seriously embarked on its military buildup. I think China will continue down that path. I mean, regardless, what U.S. and Australia will do at this point.
Makes sense. Carl, I want to pivot to another topic here. Let's talk about Evergrande, which in the United States, for Western audiences, in the U.S. and broadly in the Anglosphere in the West, whatever you want to call it, it's being portrayed as potentially the next Lehman Brothers moment, China's Lehman Brothers moment, referring, of course, to the financial crisis back in 2008, 2009. What do you think of that take? Can you just briefly explain what actually happened here, and what do you think is going to come out of it, Carl?
Evergrande is supposedly China's second largest real estate developer by sale, and right now it's facing a problem because it's a very over-leveraged firm. The operation of right now, Evergrande actually sold many of its units. It hasn't even built yet. Like the way that in China, a lot of the real estate development they pre-sold, so they sell you the promise they're going to build it, and so you pay the money up front. So right now there's a lot of people, angry people, who are concerned that they may never get their money back, or they will never get the apartment they already pay for. So again, this is a very different situation from Lehman Brothers. So the problem with Lehman Brothers is Lehman Brothers was involved in many financial transactions that need to be unwind in a very short period of time. Whereas in case of Evergrande, Chinese government already step in. They're basically going to take over the company and make it basically a nationalized, a state-owned enterprise, basically. And the people who are potentially going to be screwed in Evergrande when Evergrande goes bust is the investors, right? What? So especially overseas investors, those are the last ones that Chinese government is going to take care of. Chinese government may have to shell some money out for the people, domestic Chinese buyers who bought into Evergrande properties, but for overseas investor who may have bought bonds of Evergrande, they may never see that money back.
Well, it says
so that's what we're looking at.
$1 billion in debt, which is astonishing in regards to the costs, and they've lost 80% of their value. How did this happen, by the way?
This is a problem with the Chinese economy for, I say, the past 10, 15 years. There's a very little channels because Chinese people are prodigious savers. I read study somewhere like average household savings are, they save up to from 30 to 40% of their income. Oh. And that is why China can buy huge portion of treasury bills. And the problem is with a lot of savings, there's not enough channels for investment. So a lot of investment went into real estate because people see the real estate value have appreciated and continue to appreciate in China over the last 20 years. And with that mentality, there's a lot of overbuilding, there's a lot of overcapacity. And, there's a lot of over-bloated real estate developers, over-leveraged like Evergrande, right? And so I think this is also a case where Chinese government would very much like to set an example so that they have wanted to unwind this crazy real estate craze for a long time. And I think Evergrande there's a Chinese saying, killing the chicken to scare the monkey. So Evergrande is going to be the chicken.
Mm-hmm. Scaring off, effectively set, like you're saying, setting an example for the other investors here. But if we step back for a second, I've seen the massive buildings, these large apartment buildings that have gone empty for years that were effectively blowed, or I don't know exactly, from the outside how I would see them, but effectively a way for these companies to make money. A coming wall in self-dealing, private business moves. Family members of a CEO, chair of the board, are enriched to an obscene degree, while the company itself is going, heavily into debt to the detriment of a lot of the people working for it, stockholders, that kind of thing, shareholders. Those buildings getting built, I've seen those painted in the West as, wow, look at what China's able to do. They're able to build up these things, even if they don't need them. Look at their sheer productive capacity. But I guess I'm trying to reconcile a couple of confusing impressions. On the one hand, I've seen that painted in the West as, wow, look at what China's able to do. On the other hand, wow, look at how wasteful they are. Were these moves at all intended by the Chinese government? Specifically the overproduction of these kinds of things? I guess the way I'm putting this is, you want to prepare for the future. You want to have enough housing in the right places so that people can move into these things if and when there's an economic opportunity for them to do so. On the other hand, if they're completely useless, if they're not livable and they don't get lived in for years or decades, whatever the case, that's an excess. What's the reality here between those two frames? Or,
right.
Those are probably going to be incorrect.
Right.
What's your take, Carl?
So first of all, companies like Evergrande, they're private enterprise, right? They're not government-owned enterprise. So, really, the government have a very cruel tool to play here. The Chinese government is always trying to you can see the picture I like to paint is like the Chinese trying to strike the balance, right? It's like the in the acrobat stepping on this very delicate balance beam, trying to keep the Chinese economy from overheating, but at the same time generate enough jobs to keep enough people employed. It's a very hard balance act. And one thing people are correct that there is a lot of overcapacity in China. This was built up in the last 20 years. Part of it is during 2008 global financial crisis, Chinese government decided to flood a lot of money into the market to jumpstart the Chinese economy. But unfortunately, a lot of money also went into waste, into real estate development specifically, and that's what we're seeing today. That with a very bloated, over-leveraged company like Evergrande. So, like I said, the Chinese government only have a very crude instrument on how they can control these. Because this is really kind of the effect of the market economy, right? I mean, the Chinese government is doing a very balancing act of while allowing market economy to exist in China, at the same time, do not let it spiral out of control. I think there's still it's still very much a work in progress. Right, people think China is this like huge monolith where with a snap of finger by Xi Jinping and everything gets done, and that's not the case. There's still a lot of experimentation because we have never seen. I mean, the so-called socialism with Chinese characteristic is actually a giant experiment that started under Deng Xiaoping. I think it's still very much ongoing.
And that decentralization, the experimentation, the regional sort of decentralized way that the different regions are able to experiment with these things, that's part of what you're talking about, right? We got to close, but that's what you mean partly, Carl.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
Carl Jha joining us, host of the Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. Carl, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Or evening your time, I suppose. Thank you again. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha, that's Z-H-A, Carl spelled with a C. You can also follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk N, and you can subscribe to it at patreon.com/silkandsteel. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. When we come back, we're talking astrophysics with Tarek Saab. We'll be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want them recorded.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We have a great guest. About 5% of our universe is basically visible, and everything else is something else. And that's gotten the moniker either dark energy or, for that matter, dark matter. But we don't necessarily know what that is. And we have a great opportunity to have a conversation with a professor that can give us, let's say, some information on the latest research into these type of these items. Professor Tariq Saab. He's an associate professor at the University of Florida who studies cosmology and particle astrophysics. Professor, thank you for joining us.
I'm glad to.
Absolutely. So there was a study that recently came out. I believe it was an Italian study, and they were using some kind of xenon gas. But what they ended up with was the belief that they uncovered a dark matter particle, a dark energy particle. Can you explain, I guess, in the first, as a primary, what do we mean, or what do you guys mean when you say dark energy or dark matter? And has there been any other experimentation in order to, let's say, elicit the ability to observe either of those phenomena?
Yes, there's certainly been experiments going on. I mean, there's many experiments. It's a very active field, and it's been going on since probably the 70s, very actively. But I'll tell you what dark matter is first, because this is the concept. It sort of came around before dark energy. And the name is fairly, the name is kind of a little bit artistic. The idea is when you observe stars and galaxies, and you can observe their motion with telescopes, what you are seeing is what we call the luminous matter. Basically, stars shine and give off light, and that's why we can see them. Also, you can take what you know about gravity, sort of like Newton's gravitational attraction, and determine how fast these objects must be moving. And what people noticed is that they are moving too fast than you can account for just by the gravitational attraction of the stars.
Right, because there's only 5%. Meaning the luminous matter makes up only 5% of the universe based upon the information that was being relayed from those equations.
Yes, that's where that 5% number started coming from. And what people said, the original thought was maybe there's some other kind of matter that does not shine. That's why we don't see it. And so this is what coined the term dark matter.
Okay, so simply dark matter is presumed to exist because based on how the universe is expanding, based on the rate at which it's expanding, you would assume that there would be more matter than it is, but we can't see it. So we're sort of guessing that it's there. Just briefly, dark matter, you also have antimatter. What's the difference?
The difference is antimatter is something that we actually consider part of luminous matter. It's something that we understand and have observed already in experiments, in accelerators. And so our picture of how, for example, stars burn or how galaxies evolve and interact has this antimatter aspect to it. And antimatter is again, a concept that came around about 100 years ago when people started doing experiments. And we know about the electron and the proton, and this is what makes up our atom. And people discovered that there's a particle that behaves exactly like the electron, but has an opposite charge. And similarly for the proton. So every particle we know about, we would seem to find one that has the same properties but opposite charge. At this point in time, however, we understand what antimatter is and how it fits into the picture, and so it's not part of the dark matter kind of category.
Makes sense. So you're clarifying these are completely separate things, and thank you for that. A related question, we're speaking about dark matter. There's also dark energy, of course. Are they related in simply the same way that matter and energy are related in, the matter and energy that we know about, can easily measure, that kind of thing? Are they two sides of the same coin in that same sense, Professor?
They are related, but the relation is much more ambiguous because what we know about dark energy, and again, the term dark energy actually was coined because the term dark matter already existed and kind of it had the connotation of something new we don't understand yet. And then the term energy comes from, which is something you touched upon earlier, is we know the universe is expanding. And we know one of the things that causes the universe to expand is the presence of an energy field throughout space. And so this is what caused, us to coin the term. Now, there are ideas as to what dark energy could be, and people are always, proposing sort of concepts and seeing if they work and fit all observations. But in terms of the mathematical description of it, it is less developed and less understood than dark matter.
Well, this experiment, the xenon, I guess is called 1T experiment. Why do they believe that they came across a dark energy particle?
So they, actually, I'll just make one minor point, is they believe they discovered dark matter particles.
Dark matter, I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's so the way I've described that we know about dark matter is by observing how stars and galaxies move under its influence. But what that experiment and others say, if these particles exist, can I see them in an experiment that I build, in the lab? And the way they approach it is they build an experiment that is sensitive to particles passing through it, interacting through it. And they say, given what I know about the world that we live in, about sort of all the particles that we know about, I expect to see, if I operate my experiment, say, for a year, I expect to see 100 interactions. And what they then observed is they saw maybe 120. And those are not the exact numbers, by the way. I'm just kind of making an analogy. And so they say, we observe a bit more interactions than we expect from all the particles that we know about. So could those additional interactions be from this dark matter particle that we're looking for?
So this is all conceptual at this point. I mean, this is either some kind of mathematics based on the equations that we understand in our universe, but it's not something that's directly observable. If it's not directly observable, why is the community so certain that it exists?
Well, it is observable in the sense that you can look at how fast the universe is expanding. That's something we can do with our telescope instruments, and how fast stars are moving around each other. So that's one type of observation. But the xenon experiment, what they observe is individual particles, when they interact in the detector, they give off little flashes of light, and they record that. So in a sense, you see something that's happening. But you are correct in that there is a little bit of concept that ties this together, which is we are basing this on the assumption that we know how gravity works to sufficient level of precision that if we see something different from what we expect, is the interpretation that there must be this new particle. And there's a large number of people in the community that says, wait a minute, maybe the correct interpretation is that our understanding of gravity is slightly off, and we need to, modify it to incorporate actually the observations. So it's not ironclad or 100% sort of proof, but it's sort of indicators, and we try to say where's the majority of the indicators pointing us to.
And what are you mentioned several different, well, I'll put it like this, several different competing theories about gravity. I'm familiar with, of course, the string theory, the main sort of branch with the Copenhagen interpretation. Then there's loop quantum gravity as another main competitor. Where do you personally fall on that? And, what am I missing? What are the major ones in the field here?
Well, so the major one that people have been relying on to understand cosmology is Einstein's theory of general relativity. However, it is also known that there are limitations to this because, as you said, theories like string theory and sort of its company are trying to say Einstein's relativity has no ability to handle the concept of quantum mechanics. It was developed at a time before he knew that quantum mechanics is a valid theory, and so the two don't work together. But as physicists, we say, look, this is one way to describe gravity, and quantum mechanics describes everything else we know, so why can't it describe gravity as well? And this is where string theory and other related theories come in. But there are other alternatives that says even without going that far, general relativity works in the limit when gravitational fields are strong, when you're near a very heavy object like the sun or near the center of a galaxy. But when you're very far away and gravitational force is weak, the predictions of the theory are not correct. And if so, there's an alternative called MOND. It's called modified Newtonian gravity, that says if you actually tweak one term like that, then everything you observe actually makes sense and you don't need a new particle. So this is one of the leading, I would say, contenders for explaining dark matter or the effects of dark matter without needing to have a new particle exist.
And it would basically explain it away, right? It would say there is, we don't need this idea of dark matter at that point.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I mean, what are the chances? I mean, how many people have backed that particular theory as opposed to, let's say, the traditional idea of dark matter and dark energy? I mean, and not just how many people have backed it. I guess maybe the question is that somewhat of a competing, or what would change in the way that the way that you understand our world to go with the second theory as opposed to the traditional theory of gravity?
Right. So in order for the physics community to kind of, so right now, both this modified gravity and this dark matter are ideas that have strong evidence that they might be valid, but like you said earlier, we haven't crossed the finish line and said, no, this one is definitely the correct explanation. And so in order to get to that finish line, each one of these ideas has to be able to explain not just one observable phenomena, but many things that are related. So the concept of dark matter has been worked on, like as I mentioned, seriously since the 70s and 80s, and there's more understanding of its properties, if it existed, how it would behave, what phenomena it would observe, and how it would fit into the picture. Modified gravity is relatively newer, and actually it took a while for people to, I would say, to start taking it as seriously, simply because, I shouldn't say simply because, but maybe partly because it is saying that general relativity is not perfectly correct, and there's a lot of experience and understanding of relativity, and so kind of you're pushing against one of the foundations of modern physics. However, there has been the number of people looking into it and studying it and kind of applying it to the different observations has been growing. So I would say both are considered valid contenders right now. Most of the physics community still think that the dark matter particle explanation is more likely.
Professor, we're going to have to end this, but basically it's still up for grabs in regards to what's the accurate reading of it. The voice that you guys were listening to is Tariq Saab. He's an associate professor at the University of Florida who studies cosmology and particle physics. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for our last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the Independent Corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, that means you're almost certainly listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, it's September 23rd, 2021. It's just past 9 a.m. Eastern, and it's time now for headlines. Let's get into the COVID stats first. There were about 146,000 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. There were also 2,784 deaths reported. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 130,592 cases per day. That's a decrease of 12% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 55% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated at this point. 64% of residents have received at least one dose. And as of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 42,550,000 people across the United States and killed 681,341 people. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is pushing for her country to get as close to a 90% vaccination rate as possible. This comes after the country's health minister said the country would likely not be able to reach zero cases following over a year of an almost entirely successful zero-tolerance policy for restricting the spread of SARS-CoV-2. They did that with tight national lockdowns and, well, the help of New Zealand's being an island. On this episode of What Stupid Thing is Gen Z Doing Now, we have a popular social media trend beginning. Is it A, putting a random bra in their dad's dirty laundry, B, huffing antiseptic to treat COVID-19, or C, trying to drink a shot through their nose with straws? If you guessed B, you were correct. A dangerous trend of putting hydrogen peroxide in nebulizers and then breathing it in is going viral on social media. Health experts and journals universally are warning against this practice. By the way, hydrogen peroxide is not purplish brown. I get corrected. That's iodine, which I've confused you for a minute there. Yesterday, the FDA authorized Pfizer booster shots for people 65 and older and other at-risk groups. This comes not long after an FDA committee overwhelmingly agreed the boosters are, as of now, not necessary for the majority of people. And Biden announced yesterday, speaking at the UN General Assembly, that America would be doubling its donations of vaccines to the global effort to reduce the severity of COVID-19. In national news, in a court filing yesterday, Britney Spears has for the first time requested a legal end to the conservatorship she's been living under and straining against for years. This is reportedly the first time she has formally requested an end to the conservatorship, with her filing saying this is an important step towards, quote, ending the Kafkaesque nightmare imposed upon her by her father, end quote. The filing is calling for her father to be suspended from his role in her conservatorship by September 29th, that's this coming Wednesday, and the date of the next hearing. Her father agreed to ending his role in the conservatorship earlier this month, so that should go forward. We'll see how many hitches it goes forward with or without, though. Bipartisan negotiations in Congress regarding a police reform bill have collapsed on the floor. The House passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in March. 2 Democrats and 1 Republican have been working on a Senate bill that might pass. However, after months of back and forth, the two sides seem to not be able to agree and have thrown in the towel. Florida may be following in Texas's pro-life footsteps very soon. A Republican lawmaker has proposed a near-identical bill preventing most abortions past 6 weeks of pregnancy. Under the bill, anyone who successfully sues an abortion provider will be given at least $10,000 to be paid out by the offending physician. A poll conducted by the Harris, meanwhile, has found that 1 in 5 Americans are consuming an unhealthy amount of alcohol since the pandemic began. This goes along with increased drug usage in the country during the same period, showcasing just how Americans are coping with stress. If you don't have community, you apparently start to take drugs and alcohol, start to drink and do those kinds of things. It's interesting. I want to come back to this, actually. The relationship between addiction and community, the inverted relationship, how that works. Interesting conversation. In breaking news, Daniel Foote, the U.S. Special Envoy to Haiti, has handed in his resignation to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, saying he will, quote, not be associated with the United States' inhumane, counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian refugees, quote, from the U.S.-Mexico border. He adds that the U.S. policy approach to Haiti remains, quote unquote, deeply flawed.
That's an understatement. I mean, there's even the report, DHS seeks contractor to run migrant detention center at Gitmo, guards who speak Haitian Creole. Yeah, I don't blame her.
Yeah. In international news, Boeing yesterday announced that it would be building its first foreign assembly plant in Australia. Boeing's defense and security division has steadily been the majority of the company's income, with a lot of clients overseas. This move will cut shipping costs, and Australia's Air Force is the first confirmed customer. Again, another doubling down of the relationship there, and increasing pivot to Australia. That's all these moves to sell them submarines, to build military production plants there, working with our MIC companies, Boeing, namely. What's that doing? Well, that's building some sort of long-term bulwark, quote unquote, against China. It's building an aggressive edge that we can push against China with in the event of a hot war. And I genuinely can't tell. We've had 3 takes on it. We've had Manila Chan, we've had Mark Sloboda, we've had Carl Zha, all within the last, 2 days of shows, today and yesterday, all dramatically varying. And I can't tell which of them is right. In Earth and Science news, the White House has announced a new limit this morning on the use of hydrofluorocarbons. That's a class of chemicals widely used in refrigerators and AC units. Although they don't last in the air for very long, they're reportedly 1,000 times more potent than methane specifically, which is already a pretty potent greenhouse gas. Again, move coming this morning to restrict that. As what seems an ironic response to this, a lab at Purdue University has just created the world's whitest paint. Their goal was to combat climate change, and as a byproduct, they broke a world record. The paint reflects 98.1% of solar radiation, cooling surfaces below the surrounding temperature without the use of electricity. A 1,000 square foot roof coated in this paint has a 10 kilowatt cooling power, more powerful than air conditioners used by most houses. In business news, Robinhood, the mobile stock trading app, is adding a crypto wallet to their platform. With the crypto craze hitting America, over half of Robinhood's revenue came from crypto trading last quarter. While it was already possible to trade cryptocurrency on the app, this feature will allow users to access and manage all their coins in one place and buy and sell them much easier. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Quick note here, by the way, folks. At 9:30, we'll be speaking with Michael Goodwin. We'll be going to the end of the show. That means 9:45, our usual time for our call-in segment, is getting moved up to 9:15. So if you want to reach out to us, 202-521-1320, that's the number you should call. And the best time to do so would be really now, but anytime within the next, say, 20 minutes. Jamarl, I see you shaking your head.
There is, I don't know if you've seen this. They are, well, the Havana thing, right? The Havana syndrome.
Yep.
So apparently they're trying to get through some kind of legislation to give money or resources. Right here, the Havana Act to help victims of this mysterious attack just passed the House and is headed to the president's desk to be signed into law. Think about that. They don't even have a theory of what's causing it. And if you think back to like 9/11, if you think back to the first responders on 9/11, the people who were getting ill and sick, or the Gulf War syndrome, think of how long they fought giving anything to those soldiers that was coming back with all of the medical issues and everything else, saying, oh, it's in your head, it's not a real thing. It wasn't in their head. It was a real thing. The depleted uranium, at the very least, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the key beliefs, or one of the key things that they think was causing it. But even for the 9/11 responders, those people were getting sick constantly, had been sick for years. Jon Stewart goes out and basically shames many of the members of Congress to basically give some kind of money or assistance to those first responders. I mean, again, 9/11. But for this, they don't even have an estimate or hypothesis in regards to what is causing it. It's like death rays, from space or something. And they've already passed an act that's going to the president's desk. That's astonishing to me. That's why I was shaking my head. It was like, you guys you gave real Americans, like people who were either dealing with 9/11 or people who you basically sent over to kill and injure and maim and to die, gave them a hard time in trying to get any kind of provisions through for something that was a clear thing that was wrong with them. In this case, this is insane to me that these guys are basically, there's a mysterious ailment that just so happens to take place, but we don't know where it's coming in from. We don't know what's causing it, but we're going to dispense money to the intelligence people who apparently was affected by it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And we have named it after the city of one of our regional enemies, Cuba, I guess.
Yeah.
Quote unquote enemies. Although there's been some back and forth on that. Although it's taken place in other countries. Austria came to mind too.
Yeah.
Which, not exactly an enemy of the United States.
It's not.
But again, like the Spanish flu thing, I think for geopolitical reasons, it's been convenient to use this as the nomenclature, to use this as the term. Interesting stuff there. We've got a caller on the line. There are a bunch of headlines I want to talk about, but I want to make sure we get to our callers while we have them on. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Malik calling in from D.C. talking about the psychological effects of lockdowns. Malik, what are you thinking this morning?
Good morning, fellas. Yeah, I kind of want to give my proletariat man on the street take on that. One, I also wanted to touch on the latest government whistleblower that you may have heard about already out of Health and Human Services. But on the issue of the lockdowns and the psychological effects of the lockdown and people medicating themselves, I mean, you have to take a step back for a second and see how this appears to people. It really does appear, and I don't think that it's lost on the people in power how people were going to react to lockdowns. I think they were well aware, and I'm not talking about your average administrator or government employee, of which I know quite a few. I'm talking about those who design policy, those above them who work in the intelligence community. I'm sure they were, if the police on the ground were well aware that the lockdowns were coming, and I observed that they did weeks before the lockdown started, I'm sure those in the intelligence community who are aware of what real social engineering is were aware of what the effects were going to be. And, from the standpoint of a lot of people, it looks as if there's a mass psychosis going on. And I'm not just talking about the vast censorship that's taking place within the media and the vast gaslighting that's taking place with the citizenry telling people, that, don't believe their lying eyes. There's a vast conspiratorial, corrupting conspiracy at some levels of power, but don't believe what you're seeing.
But when you say that, what are you specifically talking about? I know people who've gotten sick with COVID. I've heard secondhand, but from people I absolutely trust, whose parents died from it, confirmed COVID cases. So I've seen that, and a lot of people's theories about why vaccines don't work or whatever, a lot of people's pushback against this stuff, it's not coming from what they see with their own eyes. It's coming from crap they read on Twitter, stuff they pick up on Facebook. It's coming from whatever outlets they're choosing to follow instead of the mainstream news. And I don't blame them for not following the mainstream news, but it's not like they're seeing something firsthand that they're responding to in a lot of these cases. What are you talking about, Malik?
Right. Well, people are actually observing political officials and medical officials and a media apparatus that is actively controlling therapeutics. Obviously, and it's not a crazy thing for people to want to discuss ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, drugs that have been on the market forever, and no one paid attention to them. But now it's within the liberal lexicon. It's you got and I'm not talking about you guys. I'm talking about the idiots. The talking heads like Don Lemon and so forth, who don't know anything about health. They don't know anything about alternative health.
I mean, but Malik, this is not a situation where those drugs worked. I mean, yes, they've been there forever. There's plenty of drugs that have been there forever. But if somebody was trying to take Benadryl to deal with COVID, well, that would also get pointed out as being ineffective. I mean, I get your point, but there's not a situation where people are applying therapy to themselves for other illnesses. It's not like you have access to all of the drugs in the drug department. I mean, ultimately, you get a doctor, he writes you a prescription for something that you're going to get. That's not something that you're doing single-handedly.
Agreed. But if it's been proven by the medical establishment that ivermectin can be used as an antiviral, and it's won the Nobel Peace Prize for actually being such a flexible pharmaceutical and therapeutic, which is the reason that it won the award, because it has served the quote unquote third world so well against pathogens. So that, I mean, you can't really debate that. The evidence is out there, and I don't know.
Actually, no, you can debate that. I mean, just because it may work for some particular, it's like saying the one antibiotic works for everything, and that's not necessarily true. You may have, it's just like hydroxychloroquine. I mean, for God knows how long, people were screaming that hydroxychloroquine was some kind of effective item, and it wasn't. And even when they started doing more research around it, they found or they realized that part of the reason it doesn't necessarily work was because of the speed at which COVID gets into the cells, or the spike protein gets into the cell. Meaning, just because it works on something doesn't necessarily mean it works on everything. Certainly, there's distinctions, right?
Oh, absolutely. But it has been proven to save lives on several occasions. I'm sure you don't have to dig.
Yeah, but Malik, that's literally, you're not responding to what he was saying. It needs to be proven that it can save lives from COVID-19. And I was like in the camp where I was open to ivermectin, and I guess I technically still am, but I'm leaning more towards skepticism about it at this point. After a couple of things, mainly I was reading somebody who I trust and did a good meta-analysis, not just dismissing it because these studies haven't been peer-reviewed. Which, okay, whatever. It's a claim. But they went through the studies. They looked at the methodology, and they were like, a lot of these studies are not based on anything, really. Either the numbers were fabricated, the number of people they had in the study wasn't nearly enough for them to prove, the actual rate at which it helps people. Basically, they looked through it, and they sort of rolled to disbelief after having gone through and actually looked at a bunch of different studies, dozens they were looking at. There's still questions for me. I've heard, here's the thing. I'm skeptical about it, but a lot of people are pushing it as if it's a proven cure when it does not seem to me to be at all a proven cure. Malik.
Listen, I understand. Right. I understand we're not going to come to agreement on these treatments. But I will say, that you guys have to at least speak on the fact that there's a major whistleblower out of HHS, Health and Human Services, as recently as the past couple of days, who's come forward with hidden video of doctors, physicians within the HHS who have basically said that the vaccine is BS, and meaning that its efficacy, that its supposed purpose is not being it's not working as it was.
We talk about that constantly. The fact that some people in the HHS are complaining about that, and I believe you're referring to the Project Veritas video, which we actually did talk about for a couple of minutes yesterday with Brave. Mostly we were talking about how that video was suppressed when it was sent to us on Twitter, how it was blocked, and I had to click through like several pages of like obscuring links to actually try to get to the video. But we've been talking constantly about how the sort of PR, the optics around the vaccine, how the White House specifically presented it, has gone completely undone to the detriment of the White House's own cause, where people aren't willing to believe them because at first, okay, we're all going to be back out barbecuing on 4th of July. And then mid-July, I guess we were out there for a few days. Mid-July, everybody's freaking out because you're seeing this spike in cases after people get out for 4th of July. This was an own goal, hoisted by our own petard kind of thing. So we've been consistently critical, I think, both of us, about that.
We've even been honest about them messing around with the numbers. I mean, the ProPublica article that went into the White House gaming the numbers and make it look, that the number of breakthrough cases weren't what they were. No, we've been pretty straightforward on this and pretty honest about all of this. I don't, meaning we haven't covered this like a mainstream media show. We may have our point of view in regards to either the vaccines, the virus, et cetera, but we've always, we weren't hiding the ball on any of it.
I appreciate you guys having the discussion because I'll be very straightforward with you. Some of your colleagues on your station are very authoritarian in their approach to how
different people have different takes, and I'm not going to, I like pretty much everybody I work with here at the station, and Jamarl's a little bit more hardcore in this stuff than I am, but I think he also has reason to be because he's personally susceptible to COVID-19 in a way that I'm not, and that's probably going to influence how much we choose to do it. But still, ultimately, I think we come down on the same side on this stuff. Specifically on ivermectin, I'm more open to it, but at this point, I'm getting more skeptical about it, just as the evidence hasn't been borne out, and a lot of the studies that people were relying on don't actually seem to have backing. And I'm not just saying that because they haven't been peer reviewed. Malik, thank you for the call. We have other callers. I want to make sure we get to them. Lines are pretty much full, actually. Let's go to Tarif in New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call. I got a couple of comments. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange, free Danziger. Hands off Haiti.
Danziger,
yeah. Yeah, it's hard for me to pronounce his name. It came out, I saw a program talking about what's going on in Syria with the anti-aircraft systems. We're telling the Israelis back and also locking onto the F-35, so it's supposed to be a stealth plane. And since Russia supposedly upgraded the defense systems, their radar has been really working, especially with the S-200 system. And so this message has been sent. It's being sent to Israel, not to fly over Syria anymore. So things starting to change in that region slowly but surely. And also they have studies. Every time I talk about hydroxychloroquine, and therapeutics in general, I just don't want to just come on the show and just talk about it. I want to share studies with y'all. Now they have studies done with it. They came out of India, and they have some other studies I got to look for that came from other places. But there are other therapeutics. Some people say they work, and some people say they don't work. So there's still argument raging on with that. Now my other comment is dealing with Eddie Griffith. He came out with a little video talking about people should have a right to take the vaccine or not. And he's saying, why is Congress exempt from taking the vaccine? What do they know that we don't know? And and they have also cases come out of Ireland that some of the people that's in the hospitals, a percentage of people in Ireland that's in the hospitals was fully vaccinated, and they still wind up in the ICU. I got to look for the article when I can send y'all, because I sent that to y'all about.
But Tarif, nobody said that it was going to be a perfect process. I mean, even making the argument that 97% of the people who ended up in the ERs or ICUs are people who are unvaxxed. Well, that still means that 3% had the vaccination and ended up getting sick. Nobody said that they were bulletproof.
Okay, but in the article where they're dealing with the Irish Times, it was saying over 50% was fully vaccinated of the percentage of the people that was in the ICUs in Ireland.
And then you need to look at how many of the people in the region are fully vaccinated in general. That's like the base rate fallacy. If 99% of people in a region are vaccinated and, the vaccines protect you, but they don't protect you fully, then most of the people you're going to see in the hospital are going to be vaccinated. They're still more protected than the people who aren't vaccinated. It's just that they represent a larger portion of the population at that point. We've got a bunch of callers, so I need to move on. But Tarif, thank you for the call. Let us go now to Karen, calling in from Maryland. Karen, you're on. What's on your mind?
Hi there. Well, we're going to change topics, but you all are open-minded, so, yeah, I find you all worth listening to if it's just for this segment. So anyway, let's change course and go to the criminal justice system, because now is the time to be doing things. What I'm in the midst of doing is I'm doing my pre-election research.
For the midterms, right?
Yeah. So what that involves for this part of my research is I am having to gather my statewide data on dropped charges, and what that means is that in Maryland we call them state's attorneys, and they're the ones that are locally responsible for prosecuting crime. That's what the office is called. And they have the authority to not prosecute if the crime should not be prosecuted, if it's not worthwhile to prosecute. And so what I am having to do is individually gather data for the counties, and then if the same state's attorney is seeking re-election, if they want to be re-elected, they should be asked how many times during their term they've been willing to drop the charges on the suspect. Because there are times when crimes ought to be prosecuted and somebody ought to get jail time. And there are other times when an arrest is enough, and the charges should not have been prosecuted.
It probably depends on the type of crime, because if they go too soft on people, if they decide to not bring charges up on people in cases where, the person's clearly apparently guilty and, charges should be brought up, simply reducing the number of people they choose to prosecute isn't going to solve it, because a lot of people are going to hit them. Why are you being so soft on crime? We hire, your job as an attorney for the state is to prosecute criminals. So why are you not doing that? Is it because of electability? Now, there are also long-term sort of sea changes. So if they're drug crimes, I can see, in a state like Maryland, legal medical marijuana possibly wanting to sort of pull back on some of that stuff, even though there are crimes on the books, where the attorneys might just selectively decide to not prosecute these things. But I think it would sort of vary on a case-by-case basis. That's my take. Jamarl, any thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you. It's going to depend on the crime and depend on, the benefits or the bonuses associated with taking a policy or not. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Karen, that's our take. We got a bunch of other callers. Thank you for the call. Karen from Maryland. Let us go now to Brave, calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, guys. I think Malik's larger point, Malik's larger point is, I think, really important. We kind of alluded to it yesterday, I think, a little bit. That we can't really, the powers that be had to have foreseen and purposely put in place what they have put in place, because we are at a point now, which I don't think we've seen in a long time, or at least in my lifetime, where you can't, not only can you not disagree, but you can't even literally get words out to a certain extent. We are in this place of contention in America where well, throughout the world, really, but in America where we can't even have conversations concerning our choices, our viewpoints, and much less our health, right? And I think I think that's going to be a huge problem for us moving forward, while they're doing the things they're doing and restructuring society and restructuring the way we deal with our economy and things of that nature. We cannot even have conversations. I mean, to be fair, we have better conversations here. But, yesterday, Jamarl literally said I was spreading propaganda.
You were.
No, I was not.
Yeah, you were.
My health choices is not propaganda. And I don't want to argue with it. That's not the point, because I'm a big boy. I can deal with it, right? It doesn't even matter. The point is that if we bring up words, whether it's something that Jamarl believes that I disbelieve or disagree with, whatever the case is, or Ted and John or whoever, if you say a word or a term or bring up a point, then the conversation automatically devolves and breaks down, and you can't even get to the larger point where you may be able to find some common ground. And I think that's a real scary thing. And I hope that as a people we can kind of see beyond it. At some sense, get our heads out of our butts and our armpits and see beyond it, because that's the larger issue. Like whether ivermectin works or whether the vaccine works or all of these things, those things aren't as important as whether or not we can have a conversation about what's best for us.
Hey, man, that's old-fashioned.
Yeah.
Jamarl, I'll let you respond.
Well, I was going to say, it's interesting that you say that, and you take issue with me calling it propaganda. I think it was last week where Shane and I was basically giving you research, actual scientific research and actual data, and your response was, oh, that's propaganda. You don't remember that? I remember that. That was like a week ago.
I don't remember the specifics, but I can believe it.
Yeah, and now all of a sudden you take issue with the issue of calling something propaganda because you can't share information that is probably somewhat dodgy. We're having a conversation right now about all of those things. So it's not a situation where you can't talk about it.
Can I respond very quickly?
Of course.
First of all, and I'll try to go as fast as I can. First of all, I was literally talking about my choices for my health. How are my choices for my health propaganda? One. Two, I can share studies with you. A number of callers have called and will say the problem, and to my larger point, the issue does not come down to whether or not I can share a study. I got notes written down all over my office, right? The problem comes down to when I share my point or you share your point, and we collectively, because we are not in the know of the other person's information, automatically just put it to the side as propaganda, or automatically say, "Oh, that's not true. I haven't read that."
Those are not the times we live in. I want to come in briefly, Jamarl. Those are the norms of polite liberal society, and we have been drifting further and further away. I would argue very intentionally from polite liberal society with the culture war stuff, and it has to do with basically the people who are in power losing control of the reins of the media with the internet rising. Suddenly, we need to vilify people. We need to taboo certain subjects. I agree on the broader point, but it applies to both sides, I would say. I don't know, Jamarl. I don't want to preempt you.
Well, no, it's not preempting. I mean, I was just going to ask, did you or did you not, when we were sharing information with you, turn around and said, that's propaganda? Yay or nay?
I don't see the reason why you would lie. The question is, what was the information that you were sharing that caused me to say that? And to Shane's point real quickly, I am not taking myself out of the equation when I'm making the point. I'm including myself because, again, we are all included in this. If I'm talking to someone and they're talking about something that I have not heard, right? I mean, typically I try to be as open as possible, but if it's something that I have not heard, or something that I've heard that doesn't sound quite right, or I've heard it and even at the time it came across as incorrect because I don't have the larger view of it or all the data. Because guess what? We're all making these points in less than a minute or less than 3 minutes or less than 5 minutes on a phone call. So you got to rush it out. I find myself battling over my words sometimes, trying to get it all out before I have to get off the call. So
I hear you.
Giving points that aren't full. So we're all culpable in this. I'm not taking myself. I'm not saying I'm better than you, Jamarl. No, we're all culpable. What I'm saying is that if we do not find a way, and I'm not even saying, and again, I think I made the point earlier, also, on this show, this is why I like the show, we have an opportunity to have, even though we may disagree, we have the opportunity to have the conversation in a better way than in most cases in other places, right? But as a populace, as a whole, outside the show, I'm talking about as an American society, and even as a world, if I want to be campy about it, we have to find a way to move past all of this subversion they've thrown at us and be able to have conversations again and understand that I don't have to agree with you. You don't have to agree with me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't control how you think. You can't control how I think. But what we do have to understand is that we have to hold certain people to account who are putting the thumbs on the scales of our life. That's the larger point. Like, ivermectin, no ivermectin, I don't know, Tylenol, no Tylenol, whatever. It doesn't matter. That really doesn't matter because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be there when you make your medical choice. You're not going to be there to make my medical choice.
Brave. Hang on a second. We've got other callers, and we're also going over time. I want to make sure we got a new caller on the line that we hit, and we also have our guest on the line. And so I don't want to be tardy. We did have time to talk there, Brave. Just pointing that out. Thank you for the call. Let's go to Skip, calling in from D.C. Skip, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
I'm literally going through the 3rd Street tunnel right now. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can. But yeah, make it quick. We've got a guest on the line. What's on your mind, Skip?
Fair enough. 2 points. First of all, the whitest paint in the world, I think is, I don't know, I didn't chime on until about 9 o'clock this morning if you guys discussed that earlier with the headlines, but I am pretty convinced that it's like probably the best thing that ever happened to the universe. I mean, it's unbelievable if you think about the ramifications.
I disagree so much. I was going to talk so much crap about it, but we don't have time necessarily. But you had another point, Skip. What's in your mind?
And then the killer T cells, you guys, it's just fun that we've been all over the place. I figure I'll just add to it at this point this morning. The killer T cells, you guys were talking about the pharmaceutical cancer treatment the other day, and just wanted to let you, just remind you guys, that technology that basically we're following the intelligence of nature. It's all from mushrooms. I mean, that's basically, you just have to take lots and lots and lots of different types of medicinal mushrooms, to get that therapeutic benefit. But yeah, anyway.
Wait, you went out. We do not have enough time to explore that topic. I couldn't tell whether you were talking like a Terrence McKenna kind of psilocybin mushrooms thing, or you're talking about like mycelial structures. It's an interesting thing. we need to go. Skip. First time caller, I believe. Thank you for the call. Wish we had more time to get into this stuff. We're going to go into our break. We're going to be coming back speaking with Michael Goodwin, writer, journalist and columnist over at the New York Post. We're going to be talking about Michael Sussman, Russiagate, and this new book confirming that the Hunter Biden laptop was, in fact, Hunter Biden's laptop. We'll be getting into that, the ramifications, and a few related topics. Also, Cuomo retweeting this article calling his ousting as governor a coup. Apparently, he's backing that idea. We're going to be revisiting that topic briefly with Michael on the other side of this short break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Deshaun, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy.
I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And this article just came out today, and Cuomo shared the article. And I thought it was funny, and especially since our guest is from New York, we're going to have a conversation with him about it. Basically, Cuomo shared an article that said this is politics every step of the way, and there was an insinuation that what happened to him was a coup, as opposed to basically failing miserably with COVID, or for that matter, the sexual harassment allegations. He's trying to imply that they were just politics. To have a conversation about this and other items, including Sussman, and not to mention the laptop story being on some level verified, we're joined with Michael Goodwin. Michael Goodwin is a journalist and columnist at the New York Post. Michael, thank you for joining us. Michael, can you hear me?
I can.
Yep. Oh, there you are. Excellent. So this was funny. We were sitting here, Shane and I were sitting here laughing at this. But basically, there was an article that came out. I believe this is New York Daily. And Cuomo shared the article. Yeah, it's newsday.com. And Cuomo shared from his account, this was politics every step of the way. This wasn't politics every step of the way, was it? I mean, ultimately, there was a there. Well, there was a number of people that were dying in New York that Cuomo basically hit the numbers, whether it was the sexual harassment case, or for that matter, even the abusiveness angle. All of these things bespeak of a problem with Cuomo. It wasn't just a coup. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, look, I guess it all depends on how you define politics. Andrew Cuomo, whom I knew quite well for many, many years, is the consummate political animal. Everything to him has always been politics, in the sense that it was about power, it was about persuasion, it was about using the power of office to move ideas forward, to silence opposition. I mean, he was brutal in terms of if you ever crossed him, you were dead. I mean, it was that kind of approach to politics. And so for him to see people who he thinks have no power to raise these issues, to accuse him, to dare to accuse him, and then for this to catch on, he simply cannot see it any other way. To see it as reality or truth would be to admit that he was wrong. And he can't, it's beyond his comprehension. I mean, I think that's why it's a very good thing he's out of office. I think people like Andrew Cuomo are actually quite dangerous with power. I mean, it is true that power corrupts. And for Andrew Cuomo in New York, he was on his third term, there was no stopping him. He thought that he was the state government. And he used the powers of state government. We saw it in petty ways to help his family. He silenced. He tried to crush people.
who he tried to get them fired from other jobs or not to be hired. He wouldn't let people leave his staff to go work elsewhere if he didn't want them to. I mean, there was a vindictive quality to him. And so when he now sees this uprising against him as pure politics, I know what he means because that's how he sees the world. But in fact, the truth is, New York did have an inordinate number of nursing home patients die because of his executive order sending COVID patients there. There are 11 women who have filed complaints of sexual harassment against him, and the Attorney General's office found them all credible and produced evidence backing that up. So for him, politics, coup, it's his only way of viewing these things, and I think it's a good example of why we are better off without a government.
If this is how he's going to paint it, if this is the move he's going to make to wiggle his way out of whatever scrutiny, even if it's in his own soul, if this is how he's going to portray it to himself, let alone the public, yeah, we're better off without him for sure. And that applies to you, of course, living there more than it does to me, but I think the nation as a whole is also better off without him. Another side of this, the nursing home deaths, the FBI investigation into his administration's cover-up of that. Just briefly, we have a bunch of other topics we want to cover with you, but any updates or news on that, Michael?
No, and that's concerning that there is no update. I have to believe that the FBI does not want any part of this. I think if they ever did, it probably went away when Cuomo left office. I think it was part of a crescendo of investigations into him, state and federal, and I think that if you go down that road about him withholding the information, that would be that's essentially what it is, not the actual deaths, but withholding from the federal government the request for the accurate data. He withheld it from the federal government. He withheld it from the public. He refused to give it to people who filed Freedom of Information requests. So I do believe he was wrong to do that. Whether they will make that a federal crime, I've always thought that was a long shot.
Mr. Goodwin, I want to turn now to another subject. Let's talk about Michael Sussman. The outcome, at least the first outcome of the John Durham investigation, just started off like this. Can you explain to the audience who is Michael Sussman? What is the Durham investigation about? And you personally, what do you think this represents in terms of the investigation? What do you think is, a conversation we were having last week about this. Is this all that we're going to see, or is this just the first in a chain of dominoes that are going to fall as a result of the investigation going forward? But starting with, who is he? Who are we talking about? What's going on here? Mr. Goodwin.
Well, Michael Sussman was a lawyer with a Washington high-powered firm called Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie is a Democratic firm by and large, and it does a lot of work beyond just simple legal work. And what he was doing here was, in effect, carrying water for Hillary Clinton's campaign, which was one of the firm's clients, as was the Democratic National Committee. He met with the FBI. He had been a prosecutor himself, Sussman. He met with the FBI to say, there's this really fascinating thing about Donald Trump and Russia that an executive of a tech firm has brought to my attention. And, I'm not representing anybody. I'm just here as a good citizen. I'm not making a case. I'm just bringing you information. He brought it to somebody he had worked with as a prosecutor, a man named Baker. I believe was at the time general counsel of the FBI or some legal position. And they apparently asked Sussman, do you have a client who you're pushing this for? And he said, no, I have no client. Well, that's the lie that they are accusing him of, lying to the FBI, that in fact his client was Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. This was in the summer of 2016. And as we know, this then became part of the Russia hoax that the Clinton campaign was spreading. This is the same campaign and the same law firm that hired Michael Steele, that paid Michael Steele. Clinton made her payments to Michael Steele, who formed the phony dossier about Trump and Russia. She made her payments to him through Perkins Coie. It came up in the campaign filings as legal work, but in fact they were hiding their payments to Michael Steele and to Fusion GPS, another suspect company. They were hiding those payments through Perkins Coie because Perkins Coie was doing the contracting for them. So whether that's in and of itself a crime, I don't know, but it's clearly designed to hide from the public what she was doing.
And I want to come back to the last part of this question, because that was a great overview. There are a couple other things we could talk about. We were speaking with a guest last week about this, who brought up Dmitry Alperovich, CEO of CrowdStrike, I believe CTO of CrowdStrike, CTO of CrowdStrike, who I believe our guest speculated, and I wanted to get into this at some point, was that technical source that you mentioned, the person, CrowdStrike had been working with the DNC. They were the source, after doing analysis of DNC servers, of a lot of the claims that Russia had hacked into the DNC servers. It's a little bit murkier, but regardless, that was the source for Sussman when he went to the FBI, all part of a campaign concocted by the Clintons as effectively opposition research and fabricated opposition research, as was so clear not only with the Alpha Bank story, but with basically the entirety of the Steele dossier. But I want to come back to this. Michael, where do you think this is going? In terms of the John Durham investigation, which is the sort of Mueller had his Russiagate investigation, and the Durham investigation is like the inverse of that, the wave sweeping back in the other direction. What went so wrong? Who's at fault for how wrong this whole thing went? What do you think is going to come out of this? What do you think is coming after the indictment of Sussman here?
Well, I think there are two possible answers, and so I'll tell you the one I think is more likely to be true. The two answers are that this is another domino to fall, and there will be many others as Durham lays out in the indictment of Sussman. He goes to great lengths. As others have pointed out, you don't need to tell all this detail if it's just a single charge of lying to the FBI for Sussman. In fact, it's a kind of roadmap to the Hillary Clinton, FBI, White House weaponization of this Russia thing to defeat Donald Trump's campaign and the spying, et cetera. Don't forget, the only other charge Durham has brought was against a former FBI lawyer, Kevin Kleinsmith, for altering an email regarding Carter Page, so that they could get a FISA warrant on him. So these are the two areas where Durham has brought charges. My personal belief is that this is probably the end of the Durham probe.
That's my fear.
Well, here's why I think this. September 30th is the end of the federal fiscal year. Everything has to be reauthorized with a new spending bill approved by Congress and signed by the president. It used to be called a budget. They don't really do budgets anymore. They're spending bills. He would have to be reauthorized. His budget line would have to be reauthorized. I don't believe that the Biden Justice Department or the Biden White House wants this to continue. They never wanted this to continue. Bill Barr, the former Attorney General, knew that, which is why he made Durham a special counsel. It's a special counsel. It's a flimsy protection. It can still be ended by a new administration, and it will just be a little more embarrassing, frankly. But I suspect that Durham is not going to have a longer leash. That's my guess. But I think after 2 years, 2.5 years, people can say, well, he had his chance. And so, COVID interrupted. I think Durham was on to important things, but the media, of course, doesn't take it seriously, doesn't want this information. I know we're going to talk about the laptop. Same vein, that anything that disrupts the media narrative, no interest in self-introspection by the media, no apologies, just move on to the next hoax.
We're absolutely getting to the laptop story. We're going to go into that right now. But if you're right, that's my fear. These were effectively middlemen. These were intermediaries. Whether you're talking about Kleinsmith or Sussman, these are not, they're guilty from what we're seeing, but these aren't the really guilty parties. Those would be inside the FBI, presumably, inside the DNC and the Clinton campaign. Certainly, as far as I can tell, you could expand it out from there, but those are the power players. These are effectively, as far as I can tell, fall guys, but we only have so much time. Jamarl.
Yeah, the issues seem more systemic as opposed to just one or two people.
Exactly.
That get pinched for this. But speaking about media and not necessarily wanting certain stories to come out, well, the New York Post, your outfit, broke two stories about, or multiple stories actually, about Hunter Biden and the laptop. And, we remember that those stories were buried, but come to find out those stories ended up being true, despite the fact that they were censoring Twitter, and if I believe Facebook even, was censoring New York Post in regards to presenting those stories. Well, Politico, the reporter, Ben Schretchinger, has just a new book basically confirming that the emails on those laptops were accurate and were legit. Now, this is somewhat of a big deal. One of the items that the New York Post pointed out was a communication, and I'll just read it. Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to D.C. and giving me an opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together. It's really an honor and a pleasure. Well, this is a problem for Joe Biden, considering Biden said he had never had any communications with his son about dealings in the Ukraine, meaning the email implicates him on some level in a corruption scheme. What are your thoughts about this? I mean, this seems like it's somewhat of a big deal going forward.
Well, it is. And what Politico Schretchinger did in a book is basically authenticate for his own readers two emails. The other one that he mentions is the one where Joe Biden is supposedly the big guy that Hunter is holding a 10% stake for in a new venture that they're working on. Now, these two emails are highly significant in their own right. One shows that Joe Biden was, in fact, helping Hunter monetize the vice presidency in Ukraine. That was a Burisma advisor who thanked him for meeting with him. And then the other one has to do with this joint venture with a Chinese conglomerate. Now, both of these are so obviously true and always have been. Tony Bobolinsky, who was the CEO of this joint venture, told me, he told the FBI, he told Tucker Carlson that he met with Joe Biden, and Joe Biden knew all about this deal. Joe Biden, this was in 2017. Joe Biden was no longer vice president, but the deal had been structured when he was vice president, and that's why the 10% was being hidden, because Joe Biden was vice president, and they could not say that he was partners in it until he left office. And even then, there were concerns that, well, what if he runs for president again, as of course he did. So they said we have to have probable deniability. That's what Jim Biden told Tony Bobolinsky. Tony Bobolinsky has told all of this to the FBI. So would Tony Bobolinsky lie to the FBI for no reason? Would he just come out and make false charges and put himself in jeopardy of perjury if he didn't have all the documents and all the evidence? Of course he wouldn't. This has always been true. It's only that the media didn't want it to be true because it would have helped Donald Trump. It would have hurt Joe Biden during the campaign. So it was essential that this not be treated seriously, that it be treated as Russian disinformation. And John Brennan and others came out with a note, 50 of them, intelligence officers, saying this smacks of Russian disinformation. Although we've never seen the laptop, we've never examined the emails, this smacks of Russian disinformation. So that's what the media hung its hat on as far as denying the story and assuming it wasn't true. Of course, big tech, as you said, followed quickly, kept the post from sharing it, kept individual users from sharing it, and only at the end of the campaign was this blackout lifted and these stories came out. But for 2 crucial weeks in late October, the public was kept from the knowledge that Joe Biden was corrupt, that he had lied about helping his son, that he was part of an operation to monetize a conglomerate relationship with a Chinese conglomerate. Just as Hunter Biden went to China with Joe Biden on Air Force Two and struck a deal for an investment with the Chinese bank that was close to the Communist Party, Joe Biden is in this up to his eyeballs. And even though Politico now acknowledges these 2 emails are authentic, the whole laptop is authentic.
Yes.
It shows you that Joe Biden is corrupt.
Well, and part of what's significant is this came from Politico. It's ending back up with Politico. Natasha Bertrand was the reporter for Politico who published this letter, from 50-plus signatories at the time, alleging that this was all Russian disinformation. Now, that was undone earlier on this year after the election took place, where that was silently walked back. But it's interesting that Politico, the same outlet, now publishing this book, now giving, albeit a limited confirmation, still nevertheless confirmation of the validity of these emails. I want to ask you, Michael, we've only got a couple of minutes left. What do you think this is going to do in the media? What, how does this story have legs? And if so, what's Biden, the big one, Joe Biden, what's his response to it going to be? Michael.
I don't believe it has legs. I don't believe we have a sense of remorse or even a sense of regret from the media about this. They'll say, "Oh yes, it's true, but it's not that important." I mean, look. The media has the right to make its own judgments about how it plays a story, how it treats a story. We can't dispute that. So it is their judgment that it was false. Okay, it's not false, but it's not important. Well, I draw different conclusions. It was true, it is true, and it is important. I don't know how more plainly to put it than that when you have the sitting president now implicated in his son's scams of monetizing the office of the United States for personal gain, what do we then say about Jim Biden? What do we say about Jim Biden's contract for building housing in Iraq? What do we say about the whole Biden family monetizing things? What about the contributions to the University of Pennsylvania to name a center after Joe Biden? Where did those contributions come from? Many of them came from China. Penn won't say. And isn't it interesting that 2 top Penn officials are now ambassadors appointed by Joe Biden? Joe Biden is, as Rudy Giuliani was saying for months and months, the Biden family has been corrupt for 3 decades. They have been making money off of Joe's government positions. And as Hunter Biden says in one of those laptop emails, my father makes me give him half my salary. So is Joe Biden getting money? Has Joe Biden been getting money from the jobs that Hunter's been getting off of Joe's name? That's a very interesting question. You would think the media would want to know that.
Especially after their fascination with Trump's potential involvement, the compromise, all the concerns about foreign influence, all of that. That was the drum that was beaten for years there.
Let me just say quickly, I think Joe Biden is compromised with both China and Russia. Joe Biden, Hunter got tons of money from, the family got $11 million from the deal that went south. That's what Tony Bobolinsky has told the FBI. The Senate traced the $11 million. Where did Joe Biden get any of that $11 million? Certainly Xi Jinping knows where the money went.
Michael, we're out of time. We got dropped there, it sounds like. Michael, thank you for joining us. Valid questions, in my opinion, and ones that if we had a fair media environment would be asked. We've got to close this out. Michael Goodwin, journalist and columnist at the New York Post. Follow him on Twitter at mgoodwin_NYPost. Also check out nypost.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back again tomorrow at 7 a.m. Eastern. Signing off. Have a great day, folks. See you on the other side.